Hello, I'm here, and yes, my microphone is not muted. I see the chat. So, welcome to Fiddler's Green podcast number 69. This is a winter of American content. Again, a double entendre. I was, I don't know, there's not really as much material to cover on this podcast. People will notice usually these things, or at least since I've gotten more consistent, usually these podcasts take place every other week on Tuesdays. And the reason for the difference this week is that scheduling. Maybe this is too much personal information, but I usually schedule these things with another every other week event that I do with my son. And because they changed the Tuesday, I forget which it is. This is the second Tuesday of January? They changed it to the first and third, and so I needed to rearrange these things. So rather than doing one podcast for all of January, I guess we'll do three, and we're going to get an extra podcast tonight. This is the podcast. This is the rundown of recent events that have occurred in the last 7 days. The title, of course, is a reference to Richard III, one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, and one of the most delightfully misquoted lines of all time. I tried to get it right this time. The character Richard III, the hunchback, the great villain of the War of the Roses, or at least the villain if you're Henry Tudor. One of his first lines is, "This is the winter," or is it the first line? It might be the first line. He says, "This is the winter of our discontent." And, he says it very bitterly because he's a very bitter person. But, winter of discontent, it suggests discontent. I mean, it's a brilliant kind of subtle double entendre from Shakespeare because winter of the discontent, it makes it sound like he's complaining about circumstances, but now his winter of discontent actually means that as far as his political faction is going, everything is perfect. This is the time when nobody should be upset. And of course, this is the Shakespearean double entendre, right? Is that the way winter discontent sounds makes it sound dreary. And indeed, the whole point of the soliloquy is that Richard III is sitting there supremely miserable at the very time when everyone around him is celebrating, his family, all of the people at court, because they think that this is finally the end of the Civil War, the War of the Roses that took place between House York and House Lancaster. I almost said House Lannister, like the one from Game of Thrones. But either way, this is the opposite now, right? This is the opposite. This is the winter of American content. The winter of American content, meaning, of course, the winter where it feels that American contentedness is draining away. Also, in a strange way, the winter where you're looking back on just, to kind of double down on the meaning of this. You're looking at American cultural content and realizing that it's going almost to zero. It's amazing. I mean, it's been 3 years since Hollywood stopped producing good movies, but I can just never get over it, especially when award season rolls around and people are talking about whatever is nominated. And not only do they have zero relevance to your life, you never even heard of these movies before. They could have been produced in some other country. They might as well be entirely foreign films. I'd have more knowledge of Korean films that were produced at this time. And so it's weird though, because there's no window into the common culture anymore. It's just like you're living in this alien culture, and Hollywood has designated that January is going to be the month where they all collectively celebrate themselves. They all pat themselves on the back and give a nice round of self-congratulations, even though nothing's been learned, nothing has been gleamed. Someone in the chat before I went on the stream was talking about just the supreme. I mean, I think sort of the supreme contentlessness of the Avatar series. Of course, this was produced by James Cameron, and James Cameron is this person who's known for making these kind of iconic films, these iconic Americana films like Terminator 2. I mean, wasn't Terminator 2 James Cameron? I'm pretty sure it was. Maybe I should come up with a list of James Cameron movies. I'm actually kind of curious myself. He doesn't make very many of them, right? Kind of interested. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's all these iconic films for the Aliens, the Terminator, Titanic. I mean, these are all movies that characterized our era. And then it's kind of ironic that they started in the 2010s with the Avatar series. You know, like it or not, love it or hate it, Terminator and Alien defined a whole generation of moviegoers and their expectations for what movies were supposed to deliver. And with Titanic, I mean, Titanic took the world by a storm, and I mean, it was derivative. I hated it when I saw it. I watched it again, and I still hated it. It was manipulative as hell. It was. It didn't really have anything to say. It was kind of, you could kind of scratch the surface of it and it would just kind of come undone. And of course it did very, very well internationally. Everyone just loved Titanic. It was an amazing hit. But you know, it defined a kind of understanding of at least what 2000s era drama would look like. And then in the 2010s, James Cameron comes out with his first big film in almost a decade, and everyone's just clamoring around. Oh my God, you have to see Avatar. And it's derivative crap. I mean, it is iconic for a little bit, right? It's iconic for a little bit, but it doesn't puncture the culture the way that Terminator or Alien does. It doesn't have kind of the staying power of Titanic. And moreover, it kind of became, I don't know how to really put this into words. It's a very difficult thing to express. It felt that Alien and Terminator were movies that actually had a vision, some kind of thing that they were trying to communicate inside them, some feeling, some deep emblematic, you know, the symbol of the T-1000 regenerating itself, mercilessly pursuing John Connor. Or I don't know. I don't think James Cameron did the original Alien. I think he was just the sequel. But even so, you know, just the symbol of the xenomorph is just something that's indelibly inserted into American consciousness. And the same is not true for Avatar. Everyone participated in Avatar because they wanted to have a movie that was a thing. I remember just this feeling going into the theaters. People are going in and they're watching this movie, but the fact that it was 3D completely captured this feeling for me. I'm talking about the original Avatar. This was 2010, I believe. It was I think it was between 2009 and 2010. And the movie was people went to the theaters to see it in droves, but it was just to get kind of this fanboy experience. They went in knowing that they were going to see like this big extravaganza, but you left the film theaters and it was just, you know, there's just this feeling of emptiness that was around you. Okay, so we saw Avatar. Let's check that off our list. We weren't impacted by Avatar. We didn't have a life-changing experience. I'm not going to get nightmares from saying this. I don't have a crush on any of the actors. I mean, a lot of people who watched Titanic genuinely were infatuated with the actors in Titanic, and it's not surprising to see why. And you know, a lot of people watch Titanic and they got really interested in the history of Titanic. Avatar, I walked out of it and immediately thought to myself, okay, well, we'll just forget this movie. It was basically like the first slop blockbuster. Avatar would be the perfect example of what I would call a slop buster. Maybe that's what we should start calling them these days. Movies that are designed just to be movies in the theater and have no cultural relevance after they exit the movie theater, after anyone exits the movie theater. the Slopbuster is perfectly calibrated to be an international hit, since it doesn't really have any kind of deeper cultural resonance. It's not trying to get at anything. It just kind of is. It just kind of exists in the ether. And it was I don't know. Everyone's talking about Avatar this week. I've been going through. Myself, I've been often up in the movie theaters, obviously, but in the meantime, I've been watching Twin Peaks with my wife. I mentioned this last week. We got through the first series. We got through Fire Walk with Me. We got through the Return to Twin Peaks. All of them were kind of amazingly good. I mean, not that they didn't have weaker moments. There were a few decisions that David Lynch made where I'm just like, that didn't quite work. But the thing about David Lynch is that when he works, he really works. He's able just to kind of puncture the veil and get to the feeling that's behind the moment. I already mentioned this last time. And the feeling behind the moment in Twin Peaks, the original series, was that the characters in Twin Peaks, the original series, are living in a version of 1950s America that has died in all of the major places. And Twin Peaks is in this limbo state where they're halfway in between the America that was, the jocks that played football, the small town people who had good stable jobs, the town that took care of itself and everyone was patriotic. And then creeping in from the bottom are all of these elements from the 1960s that will inevitably destroy American normalcy. Drugs, sex, the destruction of industry, the invasion of the town this is sort of a subtext of Twin Peaks, is if you look at the people who arrive at Twin Peaks in the wake of the murder of Laura Palmer, most of them are these sort of professional managerial class people, and they interact with people who are what I would call townies. Townies are people they're born in the town, they work in the town, they die in the town. They have totally proletarian existences that are contained in a given area. They are somewhere Americans. Whereas PMC Americans, professional managerial class, they just go wherever the economic winds take them. And of course, the managerial class Americans were the ones that were ascendant, and the townies were the ones that were being destroyed, and with them, the American dream. And the perfect example of this is Laura Palmer. Not Laura Palmer. The iconic picture of Laura Palmer is the picture where she's the homecoming queen. She has her hair all dolled up. She's this big smile on her face, and everyone in school loves her. She's perfect in every way. She's beautiful. And of course, behind the scenes, she's involved in drugs. She's sleeping with half the people at school. She's literally involved in organized crime, as you discover later. Every bad thing, everybody's secret in town, everyone's dirty laundry that's going on that they don't want to admit with each other is somehow wrapped up in Laura Palmer, who's simultaneously the downfall of small town America and their last hope for the future. And the conclusion, her getting murdered, and then her having some kind of strange second life in this place called the Black Lodge. And of course, the hero, Dale Cooper, pursues her equally phantasmal killer Bob to the Black Lodge, and there's this final confrontation. And the return embodies exactly the continuation of this. Now, as opposed to it being the small town America being on the precipice of its self-destruction, you're seeing small town America in the aftermath of its self-destruction. Everyone is atomized, isolated. In many ways, the spiritual world is stronger, and everything somehow seems to lead back to the destruction of Laura Palmer, the destruction of American innocence. And look, like I said, there's a lot of hokey elements of Twin Peaks. David Lynch does things, some of them work and some of them certainly do not. And in the case of Twin Peaks, that is absolutely the case. But what I want to say is that there's just this sense of feeling and emotion and connection to what people actually care about. I'm watching something that I'm invested in and that has something to say about the world that I live in. I'm watching Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's not Avatar: The Last Airbender. Avatar. Oh, what do they call it? There's some. Every one of these Avatar sequels, not the Airbender Avatar, the Blue Smurfs, the Dances with Smurfs Avatar. They all have like these. What was it like? The Way of Water, Avatar: The Way of Water, Avatar: The Ring of Fire. Whatever. I think I've seen the first two. Maybe I mean, there's eminently forgettable. Other than that, but you're watching somebody's. It's like watching someone play a video game. It's watching someone play a video game, and I remember when I saw the first Avatar. I can't stop saying that stupid. It's funny because I'm so used to talking about the American anime Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's hard not to confuse it with the James Cameron science fiction epic. But I remember when I saw the original one in 2011. I walked out of the movie theater, and I brought it up to my friend the other day, and everyone had the same opinion that I had, that it was kind of like beautiful but ultimately meaningless. And this friend swore that this was some kind of like deep spiritual experience for him, that the Na'vi and these sort of pseudo idealized Native Americans, that he was having some kind of spiritual connection to them, and this is how we were always supposed to live. And to me, it just felt, I don't want to insult the guy, but I just wanted to say, I mean, it would be one thing if this was Dances with Wolves. And sure enough, to take the OG Avatar movie, the OG Avatar movie in the American mind, in my opinion, I mean, there are earlier iterations of this. There was Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman in like the late 70s, early 80s. I believe there are a few other ones that were similar, like what would the Western be like from the Indians' point of view? But nobody did it. Nobody did it. No one made the shitlib Western like the turbo shitlib Western of the 1990s. The turbo shitlib Western of the 1990s was Dances with Wolves. And it's a great movie. I mean, it is paused to the core. It is absolutely manipulative. It is absolutely ahistorical. It is designed to just feed the worst boomer fantasies about the noble savage. But genuinely speaking, I'll say this in defense of this Kevin Costner period piece. And of course, it had to be Kevin Costner, right? It had to be Kevin Costner. He's just, I mean, it was even before Yellowstone memes. He was just quintessentially the perfect boomer self-insert protagonist. Like it doesn't matter how fit or how frumpy Kevin Costner is. He always has the kind of same squishy soul behind him. It doesn't hurt at the same time that while we got Dances with Wolves, there was the other quintessential boomer midlife crisis, which was Field of Dreams, which is, it's this great little pastiche Field of Dreams. I don't want to digress too much, but this just solidifies Kevin Costner's. I mean, people say Tom Hanks is the quintessential boomer actor. For me, it's Kevin Costner. The Field of Dreams is Field of Dreams. The plot is big city liberal guy and his liberal wife decide that they're going to pursue their hippie dreams by going into the countryside and making a farm, which they can't really afford, which is not yielding enough money to keep themselves sustainable. And while fighting the socially conservative impulses of their local school board, which is like a scene in itself, Kevin Costner gets like transmissions from some extra dimensional place that tell him to build a baseball diamond so that his father can come back and play catch with him. And this results in him going off with another radical from the 1960s. I don't even know exactly what. It's like James Baldwin. It's played by James Earl Jones, but I'm trying to figure out which particular character from the 60s he's supposed to represent, but it's one of these like luminaries from the 1960s. He teams up with the luminary from the 1960s and their job is to go back and discover the true meaning of baseball. And this is going to hold the key to kind of like making America new again. It's such the boomer fantasy. It's all of America depends on you building a baseball. First of all, owning the Chuds, owning the townies in your local red state community, then building a baseball diamond and playing catch with your dad. And and then in Dances with Wolves, it's such exploitation. It's just such feeding into. I mean, again, they did this before with Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman. Dustin Hoffman in Little Big Man is this boy who was raised by the Sioux Indians, and so he's sympathetic to them, but he gets sent back to sort of American white society and reacclimatizes there before joining Custer's regiment and then experiencing sort of the battle of Little Bighorn from both sides. And it's just of movies that just don't end well, that just doesn't end well. The Indians, these sort of highly tribal Indians they're portrayed as kind of like sexually liberated feminists who are all about like polyamory and stuff like that. There's this big scene in the middle of Little Big Man where Dustin Hoffman has like a polyamorous relationship with all of like these Indian squaws from the Sioux tribe, which is just, I mean, it's just what kind of like weird 60s fantasy is this? But there's a similar thing with Kevin Costner. Like there always has to be this way, like always in the boomer fantasy, you're denigrating your ancestors. Nothing is good about the white man. Nothing is good about America. Everything is shit. You're just kind of like this cancer on society as a white man. But when the white man goes to the Native American tribes, like he still gets some tail. Like he gets all of the tail. He's the hottest sexual item on the market. I mean, it's kind of funny. I'm kind of really digressing here, but since I have so little to talk about, you guys got to bear with me here. I mean, it reminds me of John Carter on Mars. But the problem with John Carter with Mars is similar. Like he is this cowboy that gets transported to Mars. He's this ex-Civil War, like, I don't know, captain or something like that, some minor commissioned officer. And, he gets transported through unknown means to Mars. And, he is on Mars. He is just like super OP. He's just this complete hero. And of course, he wins the affections of, Deja Voris, who is the princess of Mars. That's the title of the first book. And, but it is, first of all, it's incredibly, I mean, as racy as the concept is of winning the affection of like this half naked or this totally naked red Martian princess who is a complete babe. It is surprising, like all of the things like Tarzan, the relationship is kind of like surprisingly chaste. And furthermore, John Carter is genuinely a hero. He's just like his culture, his American culture represents a massive improvement on the culture of Mars. He has things to teach him. He has technology to teach them that they don't know. He has culture to teach them that he does not know. He's more clever than his adversaries. He doesn't outmatch everybody. But he's sort of a man among man. He's that's what people expected in the 20th century. They're like, okay, like we go into the wilds of the new world, and because we're in this new world, we're just like total supermen. We can redesign society however we want. We're conquistadors, and then maybe we'll marry the native girl and found a new civilization, like all of those conquistador memes or those Road to El Dorado memes from the 2000s animated thing by DreamWorks. That was kind of like, that's what people believed in the 19th and 20th century insofar as their fantasies went about going. Lord Jim is another example by Joseph Conrad. Like you go to the foreign environment, you're a total hero. You're a man among men. You forge a new society. You build it up from the ground, and you teach the natives new technology, and you make the natives better than they ever were before. And then as a reward, you get the chief's daughter as your wife, and you found an entirely new civilization. And these guys are going to be just as good as European civilization with with your mixed race children going forward. That was like the dream of the late 19th century and the early 20th century. Insofar, I mean, that was a liberal dream too, right? Because even the idea that you would marry a foreign bride, even in the process of essentially civilizing a civilization, that was almost like scandalously progressive, right? But I'll give it, racial taboos aside, the fact that it violated racial taboos aside, there was a certain kind of eternal form to this fantasy of being sort of the foreign conqueror of the new world. And whether you're John Carter or I guess Tarzan's a bad example of this. Conan the Barbarian's a bad example. Well, Conan the Barbarian's kind of a similar example because he does sort of kingdom, right? That's an essential part of the Conan mythology. About John Carter or Lord Jim, again, that's definitely a lot classier than Edgar Rice Burroughs' Conrad. But the plan kind of, again, racial taboos aside, it had sort of kind of a classic form to it, right? A classic form to it. The classic form is like, as a man, you are kind of like you get to become the beneficent warlord. You get to live the fantasy of the beneficent warlord, and the beneficent warlord they have to be they have to actually provide things. They have to prove themselves in battle. There are no weak, beneficent warlords in the early 20th century version of this tale. They have to prove themselves in battle. They have to also, and this is another important aspect, they also have to demonstrate that if they were accepted into the leadership of this new world civilization, that they also bring civilizational gifts, right? That by making them a leader, or perhaps even the leader, you are going to elevate the people who are around you, and your children will elevate the people around you. And then sort of the affections of the woman in question, it's not really conquest. It's not like you're killing her father and, stealing her away. And then and replacing her progeny with yours. It's a much, I mean, insofar as warlord narratives go, right? At least there's a sort of a healthy narrative here, right? Like the king gives you his daughter, the hero his daughter, because the hero is just he's proved himself to be more than equal to any of his braves, and this is the fantasy. But when it gets to like the boomer version of this myth, either in Little Big Man or in Dances with Wolves, and it's kind of funny that it's like from Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman to Dances with Wolves, which are exactly contemporaneous. They're both about the Sioux Indian tribes or the Plains Indians. I might don't quote me on that. Someone's probably gonna be like, well, in Dances with Wolves, they weren't Sioux, they were Cheyenne. Okay, give me a break. Some Plains Indian, right? Some Plains Indian was involved with the Dances with Wolves thing. The fantasy, so it goes from Little Big Man to Dances with Wolves to Avatar, just plain Avatar, the James Cameron Avatar. You can see how like the boomer warlord meme kind of changes. So we can't have, the first thing about the boomer warlord trope is that the warlord in question is not a warlord. He's not particularly good at fighting. Little Big Man, the Dustin Hoffman character, is, I think that's his Indian name. I can't. It also has to do with a story that Chief Sitting Bull continuously tells that ends with "It's a good day to die," which is, of course, the line that Worf takes. It's his line in Star Trek too. But it's a Sioux aphorism. It's a good day to die. That is the end of the story of the Little Big Man. But Dustin Hoffman's character, he sucks at fighting. He loses every battle he fights. He's good at shooting. He can shoot really well. But when he's a gunfighter, he doesn't have the stomach to ever shoot anyone or engage in any duels. or to fight in a war. And he does everything he can possibly do to avoid fighting against the cavalry and avoid fighting against the Indians in whatever engagement he is in. And he's just sort of like a total pacifist. Yet at the same time, the Sioux Indians just treat him like he's royalty. Like he arrives at the tribe, and immediately, I don't know how to do this without being crude. I mean, this is it's not a family show, I swear all the time. But like he arrives back in his adoptive culture after having spent half of his adult life among the white man, and the first thing to do is like they just shower him with pussy. he just he's there for like a week, and he's got like 5 wives, and he has done nothing for them. They have given him everything, and he's given them nothing. And moreover, the movie's perspective is that the white man's culture is absolutely poison, and the Sioux don't have anything to learn from the white man at all. And it goes on to like Dances with Wolves, which is an iteration of that. Dances with Wolves is an iteration of Little Big Man, except the boomers are in their middle years, right? They're slightly less horny with this narrative. So in this case, the Indians are more realistic. They're not cartoon characters anymore like they were in Little Big Man. The boomers aren't as horny, so Kevin Costner's in a monogamous relationship. He's just not like, swinging it with every single female in the entire Sioux settlement. They're a little more respectful that way. And but at the same time, white culture is totally deplorable. They have nothing to learn from the white man. Everything that the cavalry does is just going to destroy the Sioux culture. There's no exchange here. I guess fair enough. Dances with Wolves is trying to be an honest portrayal of the Plains Indians' interactions with the westward expansion of the United States, and that wasn't an incredibly positive interaction with the Plains Indians. And I'm not saying it's not like cartoonish, and Dances with Wolves is cartoonish. But once again, like Kevin Costner doesn't fight. That's the other thing. He doesn't fight, and he does not bring civilizational gifts, and he's not a leader. But at the same time, like he is their guest of honor and the witness to all of the Indians' greatness. And I will say this is the whole point of me bringing this up. I do understand why people liked Dances with Wolves. The portrayal of the Indians was deeply evocative. I thought that it kind of reminds me of another one, Jeremiah Johnson, which was one of my favorite Western movies. But that took place in Colorado, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But the Sioux Indian culture is treated in that movie very respectfully. It's very evocative. It feels kind of spiritual. I always even though I don't really have like a deep resonance with the Sioux culture, like I do with a lot of European cultures and some Asian ones, it did feel like you could reach out and touch something real behind the portrayal of the Sioux Indians. And I could totally see people watching Dances with Wolves and really feeling attracted to Native American spirituality. Like there's a reality there. There's substance there. And they're not cartoons, right? They fight wars, they hunt buffalo, and the buffalo hunting is grisly, right? They have rivalries. It's gritty. Like these are real people, but they also have a real spirituality. And okay, sure. So that's the second iteration of the Boomer Warlord. Fast forward to James Cameron's last one, which is Avatar. And in that one, it's like the apotheosis of it. First of all, it's not just white culture that's bad. It's all human culture that's bad. We're just parasites on the planet. We shouldn't be there to begin with. And not only do we not bring any cultural artifacts that the Na'vi could use, we don't even physically go there. It's not even our bodies. The bodies are essentially simulated dolls that are created in flesh fats. And that's the interaction that the people have with these Na'vi. But still, the Na'vi are they're supremely noble. They're perfectly noble. No Na'vi has ever died of anything other than human hands and old age. And even then, it's the circle of life. And like they're so at one with their environment. They've got USB cords in their brains that let them plug in and control, like game controllers, into all of the megafauna in their entire environment. All of the megafauna in their entire environment, which presumably compete with them for scarce resources, have a universal serial bus system where they can plug their brains into these guys, and it felt silly. The humans were so evil, and the Navi were cartoons. There was no grittiness about them. And of course, like in all of the Boomer Warlord things, even though the protagonist has nothing to offer and doesn't fight with them, and doesn't give them anything, immediately he arrives at their settlement. The first thing that happens, he gets their choice babe thrown right in his lap. That has to happen. It has to happen. Although I shouldn't say that Jake Sully doesn't fight. I think it's Jake Sully in that movie. The protagonist does fight. He fights against his own race at the end of the movie, after which it is implied the humans are completely ethnically cleansed off of that planet, and that their expulsion from Pandora will result in the extinction of the human race somewhere down the line for being so spiritually horrible. And if the cop-out wasn't bad enough, the biggest cop-out of the movie is the ending. The biggest cop-out of the movie is the ending. And the whole thing, the whole central premise of the movie is that the Avatar is an avatar. It's a flesh doll that Jake is controlling from a simulation pod, which offers up a huge dilemma because from the outset, he is a fake. He is a fake. He can never be one of these native peoples. So the natives get more idealized. The humans get more evil. Now, not only does the protagonist not fight, he fights against his own species. And then on top of that, he gets rewarded at the end by having the movie subvert the main premise of its inception, which is that he's able to somehow become one with his avatar body and permanently be Na'vi, which is just absolute. I mean, it's such a cop out, and I felt like I was watching a Boomer delusion. It's like, okay, I'm going to be so good to the other. I'm going to give the other people so much. I'm going to be so selfish with my own collective interests that I'm going to become one with the other group that I've idealized. And through my own idealization of them, I will obtain immortality for myself. I mean, it's almost kind of like Avatar exists almost as kind of a self-parody of the Boomer Warlord trope. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I got to link this somehow back into the theme of this podcast. If there is a podcast, a theme for this podcast, I'm not so sure even exactly where I'm going, but we'll go somewhere with all of this. That is to say that the franchise is a video game. The main character experiences his life through a video game, and the hope that it holds. I mean, in Dances with Wolves, the hope is, in both Little Big Man and Dances with Wolves, the hope is, if only we could learn more about the Native Americans, then we would be able to make ourselves like them and better. It's kind of like a hippie thing. In Avatar, it's like, we're going to play video games so that we can LARP as this overly idealized alien species. And then maybe we'll play video games hard enough so that the video games become real. So, I mean, what am I supposed to take from that? The takeaway from the previous Boomer slop was I should get more into the real world. But the takeaway from Avatars, like, what's the takeaway from a human in Avatar? Play video games harder until video games become real. I mean, that was, and it didn't help that my friend who was really into this was really into anime and video games, and he was one of those autistic people that you felt had a very poor grasp on reality. And I mean, I didn't check up on him. I wonder if he how should I put this? I wonder if he played the video games in the anime until they subsumed his entire impression of the world. I mean, that would be kind of an ironic end. I mean, isn't the ending of Avatar? It's sort of like the promise of transgenderism in a little, in a way. Like, if you pretend to be a woman, then after you do the service to the cause and fight the war, suddenly you'll wake up and you'll just be your female avatar. You'll just be this ultra idealized version of yourself. It'll just happen. It'll just happen because like your soul will transcend its sinful state, and it will be reincarnated into this perfect icon of your desires and this idealized other that's so over idealized. It's kind of disgustingly, it's disgustingly saccharine almost. I really hated that movie. And this has become the icon of modern Hollywood. And everyone is trying to like it. Everyone's pretending like, oh, I'm a big fan of Avatar. I have to see this movie. It's like with the Marvel movies. I mean, how many people were really fans of the Marvel movies? I don't really feel like that was a thing. I feel somehow that we were kind of conned by that. People wanted to be fans of the Marvel franchise. They wanted to feel the way about Marvel that they felt about earlier franchises. And maybe I'll get to Scott Adams later, but um I've been struggling with this feeling that culture has been on a decline. I mean, everyone says it's on a decline, but I wonder if we've really taken stock of what is missing. Because uh, there's a difference between actually feeling like a movie is profound and has something, even a movie like Terminator, which is just, I don't think Terminator has a single message in it. It doesn't even have a sort of an implicit symbolic message the way that the Alien franchise does. I mean, it's not even a good like artificial intelligence horror story. It doesn't hit the right notes because the solution to Terminator is always to out technology the Terminator in some way. But even so, it has an emotional resonance with the images it's showing you, and it's communicating a feeling of what it was like to be in the post-war era, or I should say the late Cold War. And this is something I see with younger millennials. Like I always have the division between younger millennials and older millennials is their opinion on the Phantom Menace and the prequel series of Star Wars. Now, like, look, the prequel series in Star Wars has its moments. It has its moments. There are some interesting scenes in it. And I can imagine being a little kid and seeing that series and being really enthralled by it. And of course, the prequel series got better and better. And, you know, as Razorfist pointed out, you will beg for Lucas before the ends. Indeed, the prequel series is much, much, much better than the Disney sequels, which was amazing. In hindsight, that was just impossible to believe. I remember going into the Disney sequels going, as bad as they can be, they couldn't possibly be worse than the prequels. But I wonder, I mean, is it the prequel? I understand that the prequel series were nostalgia for people in their childhood, but was it the same thing? I mean, I feel like the original series, the role that it played mythologically in our childhoods, was so much more profound than the role of the prequels because people felt, and I said this in an article almost a year ago, when we first saw the original Star Wars series, and I'm really communicating this to not boomers, to younger millennials, right? Look, the prequel series have their moments. I'm not going to dispute that. But when we saw the original series as children, 9 years old, we saw the original Star Wars. It absolutely blew us away. The movie was 20 years old, well, more like 15 years old when we saw it. It had better special effects than almost anything in the theaters at that time. Even with the emergent CGI, I guess we weren't seeing Terminator 2, but whatever. It was as good as anything we could expect to see. And our parents were completely into it. They loved the series. They got all the references. And so Star Wars became kind of this shared mythology of how we talked about things between boomers and Gen Xers and older millennials. It was just part of mass culture. And there were deep symbolic masculine themes in that show. There was This was a portal to talk about things like Akira Kurosawa. I learned about Akira Kurosawa through Star Wars. I learned about Joseph Campbell through Star Wars, the hero with a thousand faces. It was kind of like, and this is the thing, what we thought we had in Star Wars in the 90s was our generation's version of Lord of the Rings, which sounds silly in hindsight because this was obviously a an iteration of mass Hollywood culture, albeit a very good one. As good as the prequel series is, it's indelibly marked by the fact that it lost a lot of its archetypical power, even though it had some really banger scenes, even though it had a lot of pretty cool moments in it. And people, the acting was kind of wooden, but people overrate that too. It wasn't as bad as people remember. And certainly, again, comparing it to modern movies, it just completely blows them out of the water. But it, the prequel series lost their archetypical meaning, and so it became like a toy. And that's what people lament when they complain about the Phantom Menace. They say, well, look, the Phantom Menace took something that we thought was this deep source of symbolic meaning, and they turned it into like this really shiny toy. And that it was sort of the beginning of the slopification of Star Wars that only then kind of was completed by the Disneyfication of Star Wars. The power of these movies, of these pieces of art, has been declining precipitously across the time that we've been experiencing them. And I feel like this is it's kind of draining away. And it leaves us in kind of a point now where we're nothing, and we're arguing over what was the last bad thing, but we're not looking for kind of things that were what Star Wars is now. The kind of pieces of culture that can actually take our moment and kind of reach out of the space we're in and capture our common desires for the future. Like I said before, like horror movies seem to have escaped this trap, but it's the same trap either way. I mean, I'm just looking. Today, Scott Adams passed away. I'm going to talk about that a little bit probably later. But it just, something struck me that if we include January, if we take from this moment in January of 2026 and we include it and we go from essentially January 14th, 2025 to January 13th, 2026, huge swaths of our history have passed away this year. We have the death of Ozzy Osbourne, of Diane Keaton, of Rob Reiner, David Lynch. To talk about an iconic. I wrote an essay about David Lynch and the LA fires, not knowing that one of the major complications that eventually killed David Lynch was inhalations and movement away from the fires. He was a chain smoker for most of his life and suffered from emphysema. And it was the fires, according to rumors at least, it was the fires that eventually did him in. Sly Stone. It's like two icons of Californian music that I remember. Sly Stone, sort of the face of West Coast funk, an American multiracial funk band, Sly and the Family Stone. And then the other great frontman of second frontman of the Grateful Dead, Bob Weir, died, I think, yesterday. And on top of that, you have icons like Bridget Bardot and Scott Adams. These are people that are passing away, and they're not going to get replaced. There's nobody waiting in the wings. And this is, I think, what people kind of are realizing, and realizing what the big significance of these deaths are. I mean, obviously, like Rob Reiner was murdered. We couldn't predict that. A lot of the other deaths were premature, like Scott Adams. But, most of these deaths were just kind of boomers getting old and dying. And as sort of the natural course is wont to do. But what we forget, and I think what we're kind of lamenting more than anything else, just looking at the total number of people who died in the last year, is that these celebrities are never going to get replaced. There's never going to be a generation. Well, I mean, there is going to be a new mythology of our generation. We're in the process of creating it, one might say. But every time people died in the old period, I was looking at various people who died in the 90s. You whenever you look back to classic culture, like we were watching Gone with the Wind, right? Or you were watching, I don't know, you're watching Singing in the Rain, or you're watching It's a Wonderful Life, or you're watching any classic movie from the 50s and 60s, and you look at the actors' biographies, these classic actors, and they died, they died in the 90s. And and you're thinking to yourself, well, I was kind of cognizant of these movies in the 90s, but I don't remember ever seeing these people die and being like, oh, wow, we'll never see another soul like that. Because in the 90s, when people died like that, we always assumed that, oh, okay, sure, this actor died, but that just means that there's going to be another crop of actors. They'll be immediately replaced by the next generation of up-and-coming geniuses that are willing to kind of take the torch forward and find out what is new and right and good in the next generation. This is a process of living culture. We're iterating forward. And that doesn't happen anymore. These people like Ozzy Osbourne are going to die, and they're never going to be replaced. There's I was scrolling through Twitter. Yeah, that's how all good experience. Look, I mean, give me a break. I haven't experienced since last time we broadcast from Fiddler's Green. I've been busy at work, and it's only been 1 week. So, but you scroll, you see videos, and a video that's been circulating that kind of hung on my mind a little bit was this video by Billy Corgan. Billy Corgan, for those of you who weren't 90s alternative fans like myself, he was the lead singer to a band called the Smashing Pumpkins. This was by far my favorite band of the 1990s. I mean, I guess like unless you exclude really obscure bands that I liked and had like their bootlegs and LPs and a big pile of records. Smashing, and even if you probably include those, the Smashing Pumpkins was just this phenomenon in my mind that sort of defined what 90s alternative music was, or a special kind of 90s alternative music. And the Smashing Pumpkins was it was well before my time. So like I start listening to the Smashing Pumpkins when I'm in high school. But when I'm in high school, they're already like on their farewell tour. Like they're already breaking up for the first time. All of their seminal LPs are already behind them. This was a band prominently of the 1990s. He was from the same age as was Nirvana. In fact, their producer Butch Vig worked on both projects, both their sort of breakout album called Siamese Dream, and the breakout album from Nirvana, Nevermind, which of course both bands had like obscure records, like initial breakthrough label successes that sold like one single and then disappeared. But this is the out. They both kind of came onto the scene in the early 90s. Now, the thing with the Smashing Pumpkins is, since I encountered them early, they're kind of my benchmark for what really meaningful music would be. So in this talk, Billy Corgan says like rock music was the most transformative force in the 20th century. And then suddenly in the 2000s, we decided that we weren't going to do it anymore. And then, of course, he goes like, what happened there? Do you think like the powers that be might be stopping the spirit of rock and roll? Well, not exactly, Billy. I mean, indeed, the death of rock was a politicized event. It was a politicized event because rock was predominantly the music of the white middle class. And around the 2010s, the political class of this country decided that they were really tired of pushing forward the music of the white middle class. And they wanted to focus on musical styles that had a greater representation of women and people of color, which is AKA not rock. Because rock was a very masculine genre and rock was a very white genre, especially. And now, of course, like rock was invented by Chuck Berry, and there's all these great musicians that are rockers that were African American. Okay, rock might have been invented by Chuck Berry, but rock has not been a particularly black genre since the 60s. It has been predominantly a white genre, and it appealed to a kind of white sensibility, both of America and Western Europe, and in the form of heavy metal, the Northern Europe, just generally speaking. It is really hard to explain a phenomenon like the Smashing Pumpkins, and you can kind of see this going backwards too. I was a big fan of the Grateful Dead, for instance. Now, I never experienced the Grateful Dead, right? I never experienced what it was like to be a Deadhead at any time, because Jerry Garcia died when I was like 7. It was roughly the same time that Nirvana was getting popular. I didn't know who he was. And again, I didn't start listening to rock music until high school. And by that time, even the idea of what the Grateful Dead was kind of lost in the mists of time. Yet, being around the Bay Area and knowing people who were kind of hippies and the kind of organic sensibilities that they lived and felt, I could kind of just glimmer what the spirit of that band was. It was kind of a vision of America that had kind of transcended politics, that kind of was fully comfortable with being indigenous to a land. But at the same time, it's hard to explain, right? The Grateful Dead was not the undifferentiated multiculturalism of late 90s shit liberals. It was much more akin to that sort of like New Deal folk sensibility that came about with the regionalists in the 30s and 40s. The kind of pictures that I have at the intro of this. It was that combined with kind of a hippie sensibility from the 60s. And the Grateful Dead also incorporated a lot of bluegrass elements, and a little bit on the side through people like David Gershman, who was a collaborator of theirs, never really a prominent member of the band. These elements were incorporated, and so what we have coming out of this, and again, the Grateful Dead, it's very difficult to appreciate what they were listening to their stuff, because they weren't a band that was known for radio hits. They weren't a band that was known for sort of musical innovation. I mean, I guess they had like a bunch of musical innovation on the side, but it wasn't like, how many bands, unlike Led Zeppelin, of which Led Zeppelin comes out and immediately rock is forever changed. Everyone's copying them. Like everybody is copying Led Zeppelin after Led Zeppelin. The people who really go in the direction of a Grateful Dead are like, you can count them on like one hand. It's like Fish and a bunch of cover bands, and then the Dead without Jerry Garcia. It's just like there's barely anyone. But at the same time, they embodied a certain spirit and a certain dream of what America would be. The Grateful Dead represent, for me, a vision of a kind of a path to kind of an eternal American folk life that never materialized. Just like California almost kind of had a California culture before mass immigration in Silicon Valley and Hollywood ruined it and just turned it into global shitlib culture. The Grateful Dead was kind of like an alternative vision for America that kind of unified the hippie with the farmer and the cowboy and merged them all into one thing. And it was this artistic vision, and unless you were involved with the vision, the music might not resonate with you. And the same thing is true for the early alternative bands too, like the Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana. Obviously, Nirvana, everyone remembers them because their message was so insanely political. It was insanely cynical. The idea of Nirvana, and I'm painting in broad brushstrokes here. And I wasn't ever the biggest Nirvana fan, but this is the implicit theme that was going through all Seattle grunge, from Soundgarden to Pearl Jam to Nirvana, was rock is the music of youth energy and rebellion. That is what rock music is. And rock music was betrayed it's betrayed its roots in sort of this hair metal thing that is incredibly corporatized and standardized. Ironically, the very music that was inspired by Led Zeppelin. And we have to get back to our roots, that is being angry with society, wanting something more, shouting at the alienation. And in Nirvana's case, as I think, with Pearl Jam, there's a lot of raging against the normalcy of the deracinated 90s. The vision of Nirvana was much more nihilistic. Not only did rock's revolutionary energy die, the hope for America generally has died, and what we're doing as Nirvana is kind of just all we're doing is chronicling the end of America. We're chronicling the end of this, and we're killing ourselves with drugs in the process. I mean, like every song, every Nirvana song, from Lithium to On a Plane to Heart-Shaped Box, is like this incredibly nihilistic story about sort of the disappointment with the lost revolutionary potential that was rock and roll and later punk, and then the decision to be at peace with our own self-destruction. And I think there is certainly a bleak artistic vision there. But for me, the more important one was always the Smashing Pumpkins, and they weren't alone in this. There were other very artistic bands, the Radiohead. I could list a bunch of them, but they're all really small ones now. I get too obscure around myself. But the other side is sort of the alternative rock scene in the 90s, were other people that were kind of looking at American normalcy and feeling deeply alienated about its fakeness, and as opposed to sort of rage against it, there's kind of a more or less like a poetic description of it. What we're dealing with is the human soul's struggle against these circumstances. And I mean, and this is, I know Morgoth talked a lot about this. And we were looking at these bands like Smashing Pumpkins and Radiohead, which were kind of like, these were like the artistic side of the of 90s rock. And both of us kind of had the same emotion. I'm stealing this line from Morgoth, but the emotion of looking at these people was, this is the beginning of our generation's understanding of art. We're going to use the images, the kind of soul that you see in Smashing Pumpkins or Radiohead. Radiohead was like about alienation and the soul struggling against the modern world. And Smashing Pumpkins was much more sort of like the artistic man's struggle with the flawed nature of life. Much more romantic. Smashing Pumpkins was much more like a romantic gothic band. And they borrowed from all of these sources, like these in their seminal album, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. The Pumpkins borrow all of these early 20th century French romantic artistic themes as a sort of motif, like the images of John Milius movies and all this stuff. The hyper romanticized ideal versus how it falls short in reality. And we're all seeing these things, these younger millennials thinking this is the beginning of our attempt to artistically recreate a new world that has meaning. And it wasn't the beginning. It was the end. There was a continuation of rock into the 2000s in this interesting indie scene, but it produced artists. I'll use a band that I really like as an example. You know, um, the Decemberists, which are an amazing band, a horrible shitlibs from Portland, Oregon, but nevertheless an amazing band. They were this kind of a rock music gig that decided to make their theme callbacks to the 19th century, the pre-modern world, essentially. And they would mix this with sort of stories from the modern world, and switching back and forth between modern and pre-modern was kind of their thing. And it led to some beautiful songs, and they kind of tugged on the heartstrings a lot. But the problem with the Decemberists is the same problem with A Phantom Menace. They were technically brilliant. The Decemberists were able to put, and they were unique, and they had a unique sound, and they tugged on the heartstrings. I wouldn't say that about the prequel Star Wars series, but all the individual components were there. But the vision of the Decemberists was pointing nowhere. There was no understanding that they had a vision of life in the world that was operatively leading to somewhere that was not their shitty Portland Obama era progressive political opinions. That was it. There's no vision of what American life is under the Decemberists' vision of the world. And that wasn't the same for people like the Smashing Pumpkins and Sonic Youth and Radiohead. I mean, I guess arguably Radiohead did the same thing eventually. Eventually, Radiohead just became kind of like this critique of the modern world, and then the only thing left was shitlib politics. I think that this is where we see the end of the culture in a weird way, and the death of rock. I mean, it was in part just mainstream society would rather not have very prominent white male voices being the icons of music post 2011, right? They didn't want that anymore. And subsequently, they didn't get that anymore. The Jacob Savage article was correct. They just turned the tap off, and they didn't get any more of those kind of voices. But leading up to that, even these great indie artists, which I absolutely love for their craft, and which absolutely did have soul. They had soul, but they didn't have vision. And they didn't have vision because there was nothing that they could really touch. Rock music is more than any other kind of music. It is about motion in the moment. It's about motion towards an idealized vision in the moment. It's an anthem. A very fast anthem, a very imminent anthem. It's not as ethereal as classical music. It is not as sublime and volume-induced, maybe I say, about some forms of jazz. Jazz is about observation. It's about repose. And not all jazz, but as I'm in most of its iterations, it's about contemplation, it's about repose, but attitude. Rock is about motion and grasping. And what should we be grasping with rock music? I mean, if Billy Corgan had his druthers and the brave souls of the artist were unleashed again, what would we be trying to grab in 2026, year of our Lord? Initially, rock artists in the 50s and 60s were trying to grasp a sense of liberation. Then, in the 70s, Elvis, the Beatles, even Ozzy Osbourne, they're trying to grasp at the spirit of liberation. Then in the 70s, we realized that liberation was not something that could be authentically obtained. So you had people in the 80s and 90s try to grasp for authenticity. And people kept on grasping for authenticity until, I guess, we decided that authenticity was too expensive. And since then, it's just been, okay, well, we're going to grasp at spectacle. Spectacle is going to be the point of rock and roll. The role is going to be the performance itself. And that is just so castrated and feminine. It's like Taylor Swift. Every Taylor Swift song is about people paying attention to Taylor Swift. It's the classic example of the female picture meme. Taylor Swift doesn't count as rock. She has a lot of music that has rock influences, but this is supposed to be the icon. I mean, look, I don't particularly like the Beatles, and I don't particularly like Taylor Swift, right? I don't know. They're obviously not in the same class of quality, but I don't see how you could argue that they're not both iconic for their times, because Taylor Swift has been the it girl for an entire decade. But Taylor Swift's music is about Taylor Swift. It's a complete recursive self-referential. It's like the picture meme with the woman. Male band sings about object. You just get the object. And female band is the female singer sitting in front of the object. Great. And for rock to be authentic, though, the object that you're striving toward has to be the future, even if it's death. In some ways, every Nirvana song was about the future too, but the future was suicide, which is why every single Nirvana song seems to kind of drip with this complete death instinct, this complete Freudian death instinct that kind of beautifully points towards self-termination. In post 2000, nobody has any idea of what future we're striving towards. I guess I guess nothing. I don't think there is an answer. I think that people, and this is, I think, is really where the beginning of our problems begin. Maybe I will, maybe I won't talk about Scott Adams. We'll see. But you can see this transition where America decided that there was no future for it that didn't go through political change. That was a conclusion that we came to post 2008. Before 2008, people seriously believed, and not without some justification, that a change in cultural consciousness could kind of realign the country and we would be going in a different direction. Hence, art had this kind of eternal meaning associated with it. There was this sense that at any moment you could find an element of culture that could radically and bravely change how America perceived itself and how America went forward, how all of the Western world would go forward. This was kind of, and you would look across books and music, and remember this always was an element of the 2000s, is that whenever you went over to your house, you talk about the kind of music and movies. People don't do this anymore. I noticed they don't. But in college, our favorite thing to talk about was the music and movies that we like so much and why we like them and what they meant to us. That doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't happen anymore because right around the financial crisis, right around the change from the 2000s to the 2010s. Again, culture was kind of dying throughout the 2000s because we were in this transition state between kind of late modernity and total post-modernity. And because of that, the 2000s felt like the 1990s, but with the cultural vitality dialed down 2 notches, which is like perfectly fine. There was still great stuff. You still felt like you were in the middle of a culture. But in the 2010s, all of that changed. Suddenly, the thing you liked didn't matter because everyone in America realized that there couldn't be any cultural change without a radical political reorganization. And so suddenly, America found itself in kind of like, or I should say the Western world found itself in a space where culture by itself, pure culture, didn't make any sense anymore. And this is also where the great feminization of culture occurs at the same time. And I think this is kind of where we have to start the discussion on what's going on in Minneapolis. Across this period of the 2000s, I found that there's this disconnect. I always was able, with my progressive friends, to talk about other things. But now, every time you're at a dinner party and you bring up some element of culture, the implicit secondary conversation is, what politics does this culture represent? Without that piece, nobody cares about it. Without that piece, nobody cares about it. And furthermore, the artifacts that we consume are so separated. Like they're watching movies that are essentially like Antifa movies or some kind of like agitprop. They're watching things like BreadTube, which translate to me as just the most airheaded thing imaginable. But to this group, they have like profound meaning. ContraPoints videos have profound, and this is what fascinates me about ContraPoints. ContraPoints, genuine people I knew in real life, watch ContraPoints videos and believe that these videos had profound, imagistic, eternal meaning to them. I think what happened was sort of a crisis in American religion. The eternal God that rock existed to object against was American normalcy. American prosperity. I don't know how rock can exist without American normalcy. I don't know how it can exist without American normalcy, because rock either seeks to tear down American normalcy and expose it, to embarrass American normalcy with truth, or to otherwise sort of seduce American normalcy by pointing out something sublime and beautiful and inspiring that will take it into a different direction. After 2010, American normalcy is not indestructible. It is obviously in the process of destroying itself and becoming weaker. So as a result, the rock doesn't function in the same way it does anymore. It functions as a proxy for a political point of view, but any kind of American mass culture has to exist on the other end of that. I guess I'll seemingly change topics here, but I'll get back to that other thread. I think the one real event that occurred this last week, usually there's 2 weeks for these things. The real event that occurred last week was the Minneapolis protests. And it's been a bizarre thing to witness. First of all, as we talked about last time, the backdrop of these protests is what essentially amounts to an insane level of corruption on the part of the Minnesota government and part of the Minneapolis municipal government as well. There appear to be an entire apparatus set up just to funnel money to areas of the society that absolutely do not do any work, nor produce any wealth, nor produce any tax revenue. And this money is coming in from the federal government and to a certain extent from the productive areas of the state government. Minneapolis, and Minnesota generally, was for the majority of my life. Actually, any time the state came up, all states have stereotypes associated with them. And Minnesota was always it had a kind of idyllic reputation. It was kind of like Utah in the sense that it was a landlocked state that was known for its scenic natural beauty. Sometimes kind of a hostile environment. Obviously, Utah is in the middle of the desert. And Minnesota is in the middle of, I mean, it's essentially a plain state, a northern plain state, and it half the year it's just this blasted winter wasteland. But at the same time, the the cultural understanding of Minnesotans were these were people of the earth. They were obviously of Nordic descent. They were called like the Vikings were always associated with Minnesota because people settled there from Sweden and Norway and Denmark. And these people were salt of the earth. They were good people. They were responsible people. And the reputation of Minnesota was an idyllic location. One of the last readouts of middle class America. I mean, I won't say this too, but before the 2000s, it also was an incredibly white state. I mean, not just because the fact that the European, the part of the European diaspora that colonized it, that settled it, I should say, was from Northern Europe and not Central and Southern Europe, like a lot of other areas of the United States. It also was just, it was a late state. It was a late state. It was mostly settled after the Civil War. It was mostly settled. It was obviously a northern state. And there was not a lot of demand to move there after the Great Migration north of African Americans. And so, in like a decade or two, Minnesota went from being this idyllic representation of American white normalcy to being like this bizarre Democrat political machine. And it was always progressive. It was always progressive. It was always known as kind of like Minnesota was the Sweden of America. It was always kind of like it has a large state safety net, but it's still part of America. Blah 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 blah. Right? It was our version of Sweden. And in 10 years, it is this bizarre combination of third world grievances, democratic machine politics, and absolute pandemonium. And it is covered in shit libs. It's covered in these people who are experiencing this bizarre kind of political religious revival. Almost all of them who are women. And so we have this backdrop of this insane corruption scandal on the part of the Somali community. I don't for a second believe that this corruption scandal is limited only to Somalis or only to Minnesota. This obviously is going on everywhere. I think it's largely restricted to non-white communities, and very ironically, that has nothing to do with non-whites. It has everything to do with the behavior of whites. Now, the reason why this corruption is widespread and ongoing and everywhere and instantly kicks off the second these people hit the soil is because we have an entire apparatus of NGOs, of non-governmental organizations. This is the other end of the corruption, right? So millionaires, rich progressive millionaires like George Soros, they don't actually spend billions of dollars on activism. What they do is they create NGOs, and the NGOs hire a few lawyers and a few publicists, and the whole purpose of the NGO is to get government money, is to plug into the teat that is the American taxpayer and to drain as much as possible. So these NGOs get government funding for their do-goodery work. It is a private-public partnership, as people are wont to do. I guess that makes it less corrupt for some reason. And these NGOs are able now not only to lobby the government again and get even more funding, not only to do their initial mission work, which they want to avoid doing at all costs, because the problem has to keep on being a problem for them to keep on getting their funding. It also gets to hire the regime's clients. The big problem here is at the same time, the regime is trying to push out more minorities and women through college. These people do not like technical degrees, and they do not want to go work in a factory. They want to get employed with a degree in women's studies or African American studies or international relations. And the college desperately wants to find these people jobs because they want to sell the American people, The idea that the university system is getting young people jobs. University is the place where you go to get your guaranteed jobs. And these degrees don't give skills, but the NGOs will hire them. And so these NGOs have just armies and armies and armies of mostly women, probably disproportionately non-white women, but mostly women with liberal arts degrees, and their only job is to empower the downtrodden minority communities. So if you can portray yourself as a downtrodden minority community, suddenly all these social workers are just going to be there, help you community organize, help you plug into the resources of the Minnesota state, and they'll cut themselves a check, and the Somali community will walk away with millions, and absolutely no work will be done. It's a brilliant machine. And so now an enormous amount of the GDP of the country is just going to pay people to be professional Democrat voters or professional Democrat clients or professional Democrat activists. That's what the state has become. That's the backdrop. And in the middle of this thing, we have essentially ICE doing its job, trying to deport illegal immigrants, and the progressive apparatus kicking into action, trying to constantly run interference against immigration enforcement, which is insane. Of course, the big news from this last week was that, this person called Renee Good was shot by ICE officers. And of course, this just creates this huge meltdown online. Pardon me. The divisions between the libertarians and the people who are kind of countercultural on the right, they're not so hyped up on this shooting. And the left is just apoplectic. Even though it's obvious, at least if you've seen the video, it's just, I don't know. What do you want the rules to be? What do you want the rules to be? That protesters can block officers with their cars, and then when confronted, escalate the situation and hit the officers with their car without retaliation? That cannot be the standards for engagement, for law enforcement. That's absolutely insane. There's not going to be, if a cop stops you because you're doing something illegal, you can hit them and they can't fire back. What is that the rule you want? But that's what we're going with. And so since then, for the last 5 days, there's just been like this reels after reel after reel of video of, these crazy progressive activists marching around Minneapolis doing insane shit for no obsessive reason whatsoever. And, look, it's not particularly interesting. The woman who was shot is not going to inspire another summer of love. Nobody wants to riot for white women. They are low on the totem pole in the progressive stack. No one's going to get that upset. And they're not going to be able to sustain an extended riot in Minnesota winter in January. It's too cold. This place is frozen over, like all other places in Minnesota. And the progressives, they're not feeling their oats because it is very obvious that the elite progressives at places like the New York Times and the leaders of the NGOs aren't really hot on the idea of a huge insurrection at this stage of the game. They don't like that anymore. And so it's very obvious that the mood of these riots or protests or whatever, interference, legal observation, that it is in the process of spinning down. They can't sustain this. What's more interesting is kind of their reactions. Two reactions, I guess. The first one is that the right wing, for some reason, just goes to pieces over this. This is, we're going to talk about this a little bit probably during the super chats, probably in the after show. But one of the things that is, how should I put this? One one of the things that is interesting about this current moment among right wingers is that they are looking for any reason to schism. The right has essentially done a huge amount of damage to the left in the last year, more than anyone had ever thought was possible. It is obvious that Trump is not going to deliver regime change, and it's obvious that Trump is trying to pay off his clients in the neocon area of the party. He knows he needs to make them whole. He knows that they have done him a favor, and he needs to do them a favor in return. And of course, the right wing online is kind of done with the shtick. They're tired of Trump. They're tired of the things they really care about are demographic change, our birth rates, our affordability, and are the deeper elements of regime change. And since this last summer, Trump has done none of those things. He's no longer interested in doing any of those things because they're not conducive to re-election, essentially. They rock the boat, and Trump has decided that he's going to spend probably the rest of his administration working inside the regime and really making sure, and this is what really pisses people off, making sure that he's just going to advance America's interests relative to its immediate foreign rivals, either in the EU and Canada, in which they're kind of more frenemies, or against places like China, which are pretty much openly in a cold war at this stage. And that's going to be Trump's mission, is going to be we're going to make America great in that dimension. The issue is that this really does nothing for the right wing. And so like immediately you get this kind of performative counter signaling on the right, which makes the right look really weak. And you have, I really do admire Daryl Cooper in some ways, and some of his history series have been kind of good at highlighting elements of history that have been underexplored. The guy can't keep his cool. And I think that the recent shooting of Renee Good kind of exposed this in a lot of people. Initially, the shooting looked a lot worse than it ultimately was. Now, at this stage, we pretty much know that Renee Good and her wife, or whatever you want to call it, her partner, were essentially instigating a confrontation with police, up until the point where the partner demands that Renee Good drive right into the police officer, and she hits him before the police officer returns fire. Before that, it looked like it might have just been a bad shoot. But I mean, look, if we're being serious here, are we being a serious political organization? If we were, essentially, let's say, for instance, that Trump was our guy. I have very notably kept out of electoral politics because I think they're distracting. But let's say that Trump was our guy, and this was the push to essentially take America back. There's going to be a few bad shoots. That's just the nature of how political force works. That's how everything works. The Democrats never apologize. Asha Babbitt, or what's her name? Is it Asha Babbitt? I think it's Asha Babbitt, the woman who shot in the Capitol protests. I saw a video of that. It was a terrible angle, but from what I could see, Babbitt wasn't even presenting a threat against the officer. She was just there trespassing, and the officer was just like, "Dodge this," boom. And like she goes right down. This woman weighed like 120 pounds. She was a slight woman. This was the idea that this woman posed more danger to that officer than the car. It is insane, right? How much time did anybody in the progressive wing spend lamenting the overuse of force in that interaction? I mean, they were outright celebrating it. I don't think we should outright celebrate the death of Renee Good. I think that's gauche. It signals like this weird chimp energy that the right wing has, in my opinion, gotten far, far too comfortable with. Until your guys rule the regime, the government is not your friend. And although ICE is essentially a sympathetic body of the government, you have to imagine that in the very likely event that the Democrats are going to get at least one more turn at the wheel, all of those security apparatuses are going to be imminently used against you. So there was sort of this test for the right wing. The test for the right wing is how would you interact maturely with something, with something that occurs that is less than ideal from the right. People saw this in Steve Laws, and the right more or less passed the test. And they saw it with Nick Fuentes, and they more or less passed the test. A lot of people did not pass the test when it came to Ashley Babbitt, not Babbitt, Renee Good. And I think that the way you handle some bad thing that's in a news cycle from the right is you just cool down, you observe it, and you say something like, well, that is very unfortunate, but I can see that this was done, this action was taken in pursuit of a greater good. And while it's not my position that this should be done in the future, I can see why this action was done. This was a response to a concern. This is something that Millennial Woes was talking about recently. I don't know who originally thought of this, but someone said, the way you handle an extremist from your side that said something non-towards or extreme or something you wouldn't agree with, you simply say, that's not my position, but I see how people who believe that are responding to a concern. And then you lay out your position for as long as you would do. This is what I would do to address the concern. You reframe it. And then lastly, and this is sort of the importance part, this is something that Woes, I think, added to this cool frame. You remind the antagonist that the person involved is your friend. This extremist is my friend. I don't agree with everything he says, but I understand that he's part of a conversation, which signals to the antagonist that they cannot salami slice you, they cannot wedge you away from the larger issue, that you are essentially presenting a front of solidarity. Now, look, you can, if you want to enter into conversation with us, maybe I'd be on your side, hypothetically, in this conversation with this radical friend, but you'd have to be in conversation with us. And I'm not going to publicly signal against my friend outside of a larger conversation that directly addresses the issues that I'm concerned about. Mature boomer leftists understood how to do this in the 90s and the 2000s. The right wing still hasn't mastered it. It's still going off on this whole thing. I was thinking about Academic Agent too. I kind of feel always caught between Academic Agent and Aaron McIntyre. These are two men who I deeply admire, but Academic Agent is way too enthralled. He's way too obsessed with elite energy. He is an elitist to the core. I mean that both in the sense of Italian elitism, political realism. He's an elitist in that sense. He is also an elitist in his disposition. He is somebody who was born and bred for the academy. And what people in the academy want more than anything else is to differentiate themselves from the common man. And so the second he sees people doing stupid things on the right, he immediately counter-signals it. He immediately puts all of them in a different box and himself in all of them in one box and himself in another. He has a complete bright line cut down the middle. And Aaron McIntyre, again, a man deeply admire. I think he's just, despite himself, I know he's not a populist. But sometimes I feel like he believes in populism despite himself. He believes in populism. He thinks that the chimp energy is going to do something independently of itself. And I've voiced these concerns to him. And it's not like there's a big disagreement between the two of us. We are aligned on 99% of other things. But I always get the sense in how he talks about things that he believes that there is a certain magic to populist energy, that there's a certain ghost in the machine, of kind of like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, chimp energy, of the will of the people. And because of that, he's very disappointed when people cannot hold the line on political fronts. Um, I fundamentally think that this is something that we shouldn't expect. I mean, first of all, to kind of square the difference between academic agent and Aaron McIntyre. Now, again, they had that famous debate about putting the woke away, which I haven't heard them mention in over a year. So I think, the answer was always both, and they both half won. But, we are where we are right now. But the interesting thing between the two of them is their relative desire to either countersignal the chimp energy of the moment or to kind of stand on top of it. In my opinion, both are not the role that we should be playing. The role of the public intellectual is to bridge elite opinion, or I should say proper elite opinion, or aligned elite opinion, elite opinion that is invested in the future. It's to bridge that with the force of the population. It's to create a communication between the two of them. Essentially, allow the elite ideas to steer the elephant that is populism. And I'm sorry, I don't think that our role is to join the party. Anytime, I'll say this, anytime that you're getting angry at like a collective of people online, either because they're not kind of like exerting discipline, or they're posting cringe, or they're looking really stupid. Academic agents very upset about that. Or you have a variety of other people in academic agent circle. They're really, really frustrated with the fact that when Trump invades something like Venezuela, like he essentially deposes the government of Venezuela. And when he does that, SEAL Team, I don't know, not SEAL Team 6, one of the other Delta Force is out in operation, and the regime falls in like 2 hours with minimal casualties and no American casualties. And of course, all the right wingers are out there. It's impossible not to feel like a certain feeling when that happens, when like heroic men of your tribe have a victory. You want to go out and celebrate. And so all of these right wingers are kind of seal clapping this, which is, of course, not what you want to do. It does make you look kind of like, because let's be honest, Trump's foreign policy is not an American first foreign policy. It is not aligned with your interests. It is aligned with the interests of various different parties inside the DoD, various different people who have foreign interests. There's a lot of, now I'm not saying that the Venezuela expedition is going to necessarily fail, or there couldn't be good that comes out of that. And I'm certainly not saying that the troops were not heroic. I'm sure they were very heroic. But as a political operative, you don't just want to like rubber stamp this, right? Because what's going to happen is there's a high probability that this military action will result in either a fiasco, or it will result in a situation that is not preferable. For instance, it could result in a lot more Venezuela. I mean, this is the opposite what the regime is telling us right now, but it could result, the change of regime in Venezuela could paradoxically result in more Venezuelan refugees coming to the United States. And in the actually kind of likely event that might happen after the Democrats get into power, by going all in on this with the seal clapping and high-fiving, it weakens you for that pushback, because it makes it look like your ideology is just reduced to this decision made by government that is not aligned to your interests. And so people like Academic Agent and others, maybe SSJ Green River, if you know who he is, they're very right to push back against this and to kind of decry this. But again, it's not your job either to get angry at the plebs for being plebs. It's your job to educate them. It's your job to gently nudge them back into position and show them a better way. And so I don't know. I feel like the right wing has kind of, I'm not saying it's like really lost its way, but I mean, it's just, it kind of failed a test in Minneapolis. The test of Minneapolis was how cool can you be? And so this kind of brings me to the other side of it. There's kind of an interesting psychological moment occurring on the left. This is the most interesting thing that's been on my mind this week. And I probably should have started with it, but whatever. You're on like an hour and a half of digressions, so it is what it is. You're watching this army of hysterical women invade Minneapolis and get themselves hurt by putting themselves in dangerous positions with police. And I don't think any one of them knows what she's fighting for. It's just this emotional overflow. I remember this when it happened in Black Lives Matter. Every single woman in my workplace was a fanatic for BLM, for the COVID restrictions. And then what happened? Well, Ukraine happened, and then like that, it was like the previous 2 years had never happened. It just got washed right out of their brains. And so, but that being said, the political energy on display in Minnesota, it is financed by NGOs. The reason why these activists are there is they're paid to be professional activists. They work for schools, they work for governmental organizations, they're professional activists, they're professional healthcare providers that accept money from essentially these fraudulent programs to, doing these useless checkups so they can get paid for 10 hours of work by doing a house call that takes them 2. All of these people are essentially getting paid, but for a moment, and in Minneapolis right now, there is more concerted political energy than there is in the entirety of right-wing USA, the entire country. There's more political energy there than in anything that the right wing can possibly muster for itself. Now, it is incredibly female political energy. It's hysterical. It's pointless. And like all political female energy, it does not last. Females in politics are the ultimate hares versus the male tortoises. They hit hard. Everyone pays attention to them. Their tears win in the marketplace of ideas, but they have no consistency and they can't hold focus. And the second a shinier thing comes along that excites their activist energy, they'll leave. But that being said, the emotion of seeing this is just this. How are we going to rule over these people? How are you possibly going to rule over? How are you possibly going to rule over all of these hysterical women? These are the millennials that either didn't get married or got divorced. I guess in the case of Renee Good herself, she was married and widowed, which is kind of unusual. I would imagine that most of these activists that are out there in Minnesota are just perennially unmarried women. They're femcells, for lack of a better word. This is the crop of femcells that we were always anticipating. And any political solution for the West is going to have to find some way of ruling over them. And it is sort of this conundrum, right? One of the biggest failures for the right wing in the last 5 years is its inability to kind of incorporate female participation in a productive way. Now, the real problem with the right wing and female participation is, so the right wing, and everyone realizes this who's looked into it a little bit, the left wing is one thing. It is one thing. It is one magisterium. It is one cathedral. Now, there are radical elements of this cathedral, and there are moderate elements of this cathedral. But the left is one unified thing with one moral vision for the future. And their moral direction is shared everywhere. If you're a leftist and you're concerned about enforcing the norms of racism and sexism and homophobia or whatever, you can go to communist circles and do that. You can go to Google and do that. You can go to universities and do that. You can go to the moderate wing of the Democratic Party and still operate under the same moral rules. This is not true for the right wing. The right wing is not one thing. The right wing is everybody that is not left. Like, with some very rare exceptions, like ISIS, and I guess ISIS is technically a right wing, but they're not in any kind of right wing coalition. But the right wing is basically every single person that is not part of the left wing cathedral or a client of the left wing cathedral. If you are on that cubby, you are on the right. Now, okay, why does this make the right wing unappealing to women? And people say, like, oh, the women just are implicitly radical. They're implicitly revolutionaries. And that's why they're not right wing. And, you have to be like the left if you want to attract women. This is not what is going on. Anybody who knows anything about history knows that women are not radicals or revolutionaries. They never have been radicals or revolutionaries, and they currently are not radicals or revolutionaries. Renee Good and her partner were not rebelling against the state. They were acting for the state. They were acting for the actual state of America, the deep state, the permanently democratic state of America. They were not rebels. They were, in fact, legal observers. They were acting with what they saw was the law. I mean, kind of ironically enough, the real law of the United States, the real government of the United States, gave them permission to do things that would be considered broadly illegal and under any other circumstances for any other non-progressive to do. If you're a non-progressive, you can't just go up to paramedics or police officers and go like, come on, want to fight me? I'm blocking your way. You can't take your emergency vehicle through this street. We've created a blockade. No more ambulances, no more fire trucks, no more police cars. Want to fight me? Let me grab your gun. You can't do that. I mean, there was this case where there were pro-life protesters that were kind of in front of the door of an abortion clinic. And even that resulted in a huge crackdown by the legal administration of the federal United States government. It was a case, and now on, once upon a time, I went to one abortion protest when I was newly Catholic. But your prayer vigils, they have to be on the other side of the street, nowhere near the door of the abortion clinic. They can barely see you when you're there. That's how strictly they enforce this. And on the other side of that, if you were an adherent of the main orthodoxy of the government, you could just go up to law enforcement officers, go up to emergency workers, and just go want to fight me? I'm going to grab your gun. I'm blocking off your vehicle. I'm preventing you from getting in the door. I'm chaining myself to the sidewalk or whatever, right? You can just do this. This is broadly illegal activity. You are essentially terrorizing and harassing federal emergency workers or state emergency workers. It is totally illegal, and these people never suffer any consequences for their actions. Sometimes when they egregiously cross the line, literally hitting police officers with their car, they catch a stray bullet, and it's very tragic, but you can't ignore the fact that the only reason why these protests are out there breaking the law effectively is because they've been given permission by the real government of the United States to break the law. Women are not revolutionaries. They are always conservatives. The second thing about women is that women, they are ultra moralizers. They love to moralize. They love to police rules. This means that the left generally is a godsend for them. It's a godsend for them. They love the left because the left is one thing. It's a magisterial, moral way of viewing the universe. And it happens to implicitly align with the kind of care-first understanding of the world that leftists pursue anyway. And so they love it because inside any leftist, moderate, or mainstream institution, a woman could walk up to you and essentially browbeat you over being insufficiently progressive, insufficiently any kind of thing that is a progressive value. You can do that. There is no equivalent thing that you can do on the right wing. There is none. There is none. Because the right wing is not one thing. The right wing is many things. The right wing is many things. There are Catholics and pagans. There are men's rights activists and traditionalists and distributists and monarchists and all sorts of things. We are defined by our heterodoxy. You can't browbeat people like that. There's an example, right? I've given this to, I've talked about this to various people. I have some family members who are very progressive, and they talk about politics all the time. And one of the great mysteries, I say, is like, well, if these same people, these same family members, had been born 100 years in the past, would they be ultra political? Almost certainly not, because you couldn't browbeat people over political issues over the dinner table. You couldn't browbeat. Instead, people would browbeat each other over not being courteous, over not being religious enough, about not being patriotic enough, perhaps if this was sometime in the 40s or very early 50s. Those were kind of like the implicit moral pulls, and women clustered to them because of that. You had women like reading books about mismanners and correcting people, and that was a very good role for them. And so the example I always give is, I'm Catholic, most of my family is religious. Let's say that I had a nun over, or sorry, a sister, and we're saying prayers around the dinner table, and she corrects us that we're not doing something properly with our prayers. Our response will be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, sister. Thank you for telling us that. We're going to try to do better next time." But now let's say that I'm sitting down for dinner, and it's Thanksgiving dinner, and it's with my progressive family. What if I were to say something like, "Oh, we're really not saying the prayer right"? Their reaction would be like, "Oh my God, Dave, you're such a stick in the mud. What, you're such a religious fanatic. What's wrong with you? This is silly. Go away. Like, you can have your own thing your place. We're doing our things our way." However, if a progressive activist or somebody who was kind of more aligned with the politics said, "Oh, guys, I think that this Thanksgiving display we have, I think that this is racist. I think this thing you're doing is homophobic." People will be like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry we were doing this racist and homophobic thing during Thanksgiving. This Indian display is really insensitive. I'm so sorry. We'll try to do better." That's exactly the kind of reaction that women look for, and they can get it by being part of the left, and they can't get it for being part of the right. And so what happens is, across 2021 to 2025, what would happen is women would kind of become affiliated with the right. And then the question would be like, what is their role? And they would always kind of they'd always want to have an identity. And they'd always want to kind of try to enforce morality, as they want to do generally as women. The problem is that there was no opportunity to enforce morality, because there was no opportunity. That people on the right do share moral precepts in the broadest sense, but there's no shared agreement on manners. There's no shared agreement about how you have to respect women online, or you have to do this or that, or you have to be sensitive in these areas. Now, if you were at a parish dinner, there would be those kind of regulations. But in right-wing spaces generally, where people are in broad coalition, there are no regulations like this to impose. And to the extent that you do, you're just going to get people rolling their eyes at you and telling you to mind your own business, and that they don't care. And when that happens to women, when they try to enforce a norm and people tell them they no longer care anymore, it's useless. That their role is kind of completely destroyed. And the right wing will be like that for the foreseeable future until it becomes the reigning monoculture of at least part of the West. Okay. So then women were saying like, well, maybe we will try like to 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 embrace the trad label as our image online. And of course, the whole problem with this is that when right wingers say trad, when at least when male right wingers say trad, all we mean is normal before 1980 or normal before 1960. What was normal before 1968? If you do that, you are trad. But by that measure, almost all of us were raised in trad homes. And what happened was this whole trad lifestyle thing among right wing women, it started becoming like this incredibly performative one-upsmanship. And what happened was that inevitably there were just fakers. There were just bad actors who essentially copied the memes so that they could become simulacra of the trad lifestyle. And this made women absolutely furious, absolutely furious. And so eventually, like, it became impossible to continuously hold a large number of female influencers on the inside of a right wing ideas space. It's just not the right place. I mean, obviously there are exceptions. If you're a woman and you want to have a contentious argument about ideas, like Aiden Paladin does, that this is the right place for you. Like, welcome to the ranks. It's equal opportunity. But there's not going to be a place where you become the hallway monitors of the right wing. It's not that kind of thing yet. It's a broad coalition. You can't do that. And nor is there some kind of like right wing meme lifestyle that you can advertise to the world and get brownie points for. All you're doing in that stage is inviting grifters to come over and essentially co-op you and make you look stupid. And so, this whole thing just sort of disintegrated out from under our feet. And I'm just looking at this Minneapolis situation and thinking to myself, at some point, every one of these protesters is going to have to be integrated into a world that no longer contains progressivism. I still hold to my idea that progressivism is dying. I think that, Minneapolis demonstrates just how powerful the progressive apparatus is, but the belief is dead. It's past its prime. And the Democrats will get another round at the bat, and they will absolutely try to punish us, but it will be like Keir Starmer's regime. It will be hollow. Nobody believes in this anymore. No one is sincere about their belief in it anymore. And eventually the left wing is going to have to arrest everybody that is not a hysterical fanatic, because as soon as people encounter genuine people who are not drinking the Kool-Aid, they're going to immediately see right through the pretenses that the progressive regime has. But we will still be faced with the problem. How do we incorporate these apostates? How do we make them our people? I mean, it kind of reminds me of Curtis Yarvin's latest essay about a hard party. I always kind of, I like Yarvin. And he was talking about, in order to win, you need a hard party. By hard party, he means one that is absolutely cohesive, that turns on a dime. I think something like that is eventually going to develop for right wingers. I think that when progressivism dies permanently, it will start becoming incredibly unattractive to women to be part of it and to be seen as a part of it. And when that happens, women will kind of exit stage left. And what they'll be looking for is not so much a place to give them validation, but a safe space to be kind of private individuals. And I think that the right might be able to give that to them. Now, I think the big problem with Yarvin's idea of a hard party is that, it disregards belief. It disregards religion. There is no cohesion without commitment, as I said last time. There is no cohesion without commitment. And so eventually, all these organizations like basket weaving, like the Old Glory Club, eventually they will all, I mean, they are designed to be fraternal organizations. But the only thing that can kind of succeed them in the next stage of this process is a concerted belief system, a concerted religious view of the world that is absolutely enthralling. That will be kind of like a moment of religious awakening. This is not something that I think we've ever seen in the modern world for the last 100 years. But that is the next step, because there's no cohesion without commitment. There's no cohesion without commitment. And when that comes about, I think everything will kind of start falling into place. It's been a kind of a disorganized talk today, but I kind of wanted to finish with the Scott Adams thing. And this is, so Scott Adams, of all the people who passed away this year, from David Lynch to, and I'm including this little lip of January into 2025, but from Ozzy Osbourne to David Lynch to Rob Reiner, I felt like Scott Adams was the most significant one. Because he was a boomer in a way. I mean, he was technically Gen X. He died very young of this cancer. But he was a boomer in the sense that he lived the boomer dream. And he was of that era in a lot of ways. He got his main break in the early 90s with Dilbert. But his main role is being transitional, a transitional figure. He started out in kind of a complete boomer mode. And, you go back to old Dilbert, he has a great sense of humor. He's a great writer. And this is kind of what makes Scott Adams' journey really amazing. I mean, first of all, I think he worked for Bell Labs, which, if ever there was a boomer trajectory for a tech guy, it would lead straight through Bell Labs. Bell Labs was the boomer tech company. They invented everything in the technological era that we know and love today. It almost all came from Bell Labs. So he goes from there, kind of his career is stifled, and then he starts doing comics, this Dilbert comic about a nerd. Now, Dilbert Comics was first about pretty much everything. And then it started becoming more about work. And what was so interesting about Dilbert is it fundamentally resisted. Dilbert, it was a very special comic. It would have been so easy to make Dilbert a paint-by-numbers leftist critique of the corporate world, like a Ralph Nader critique of the corporate world. Like, the problem with the corporation is that the rich CEO has all the money in big Monopoly Man money bags. They're stealing the excess wealth of the office-dwelling workers who are exploited because they can't eat food, while the boss has all of the riches and buying the big car. And now you're struggling with alienation in a cubicle. Dilbert certainly dealt with alienation in a cubicle. But the critical thing that Scott Adams realized, and he kind of organically derived this, he made the leap practically from observation of the real world. He made the ideological leap that other people like James Burnham and Christopher Lasch and many others had made through philosophical argument and observation of macrocosmic systems. Scott Adams realized that the problem of the modern world, or the modern corporate world, it was not inequality that led to alienation, but the fundamental uncontrollability or unaccountability of systems. The system was unaccountable. It was not a system that was led by people. It was just sort of on autopilot. And the villain of all Dilbert comics is not the owner class, but the manager class, the pointed hair bosses. What's the quality of the pointed hair boss? Does he just have like big Scrooge McDuck money bags? Is he grinding people by demanding they come into work extra hours? Well, maybe a little bit, but the big problem with the pointy haired boss is he has no idea what he is doing there. He is there to manage engineers that are building a product he doesn't understand, to serve a business model which he doesn't understand. And the CEO, similarly, is just a guy that is managing. He's there to serve stockholders and the stock price, which he doesn't really understand, and then manage a company, which he also doesn't really understand. And everything at all levels is being buoyed up by these managerial systems that keep the exoskeleton of the thing rolling along while nobody really knows what they're doing. And like, this is the story of modern corporate America. The alienation is due much more to the fact that nothing in Dilbert's life seems to be under human control. He's not oppressed by a tyrannical boss. He's caught in a system where the boss doesn't even understand what's going on. All decisions are arbitrary, none of them make sense, and none of them are being done for any reason. It's just sort of an implicit autopilot that the whole system is operating towards, without purpose, without vision, without any spiritual essence to it. I think that's kind of brilliant with Scott Adams, is that, he went on from that to doing, and he realized, I think, more than anybody else, that the modern world was essentially caught in a trap. It was a mechanistic trap, but it was a trap that was sort of fundamentally unhuman. Humans are being trapped by their own stupidity. And the real problem is that people were being convinced that they were smarter than they actually were, and they were being over-promoted. An example of the Peter principle, and that people are promoted to their maximum incompetence. And Scott Adams' first book was The Dilbert Principle, a variation of that. In Dilbert, unlike a leftist tale of the corporate world, in the leftist tale of the corporate world, the CEO would be an idiot, and all the people under him would be really smart. In Dilbert, the vast majority of people are absolute idiots, and they farm their decision-making process out to other people because they don't want to think about things. But the people who they farm their decision-making out to are themselves just kind of scammers. They're either scammers or they're other idiots enthralled to the same systematic perspectives. And so what you see in Dilbert and in the early Scott Adams books, like The Dilbert Principle, or I forget the other ones that were early comedic books, Clues for the Clueless. His vision of the modern world was a bunch of people who were constantly struggling against a headless system of management and their own intellectual limitations. And that people needed guidance. And that was always the image of Dogbert was kind of funny, because Dogbert is this incredible, cynical actor whose aspirations are nevertheless to rule the world and institute a Dogbert monarchy. And when Dogbert's asked why, he lists very much the same reasons I do. Like, everyone's just too stupid to run themselves. They have to defer their actions to somebody who actually will actually be in ownership of their actions. And Dogbert has my favorite comic where he's Saint Dogbert, and he pays people to cast out the stupidity of their lives. And so there's this little comic panel you could do where Saint Dogbert's weaving his staff, going, out, demons of stupidity, and it's supposed to like banish the stupidity in any given system that you're struggling with. Usually people's computers or printers or whatever. People would tape that little panel to them. But that was the vision that Scott Adams had. And that is what we're trapped in right now. That's what eventually turned him to the right wing. That's what eventually made him become aware of all of these systems, like the anarcho-tyranny that he called out multiple times in his podcast. The necessity of some figure like Trump, maybe not Trump himself, but some some figure that would kind of restructure America and put it under some human vision of what the future would be. He understood all of that. He went from the boomer world to the red pill world at an incredibly old age. He's one of the first people that was red pilled. I mean, in some sense, Scott Adams is like the perfect image of hope, isn't he? For all of us. If there's one thing that we're struggling under right now, it's the fact that all of our institutions are created by boomers who have a fundamental misunderstanding of how human anthropology works and who are designing systems that could only possibly work in a very, very narrow slice of the late 20th century. Yet nothing we say or do or present ever reaches them or gets them to reconsider what they're doing. And we think there's no way to convert the boomers. Well, I mean, isn't Scott Adams the ultimate example of how that's not possible? That is not true. I should say that it is possible to go from the boomer truth regime to enlightenment at a very, very advanced age. I mean, maybe we don't know this. The last thing that we were hearing from Scott Adams was that he had converted to Christianity. And this is the interesting thing, because it is kind of like the last real question for us. Now, unfortunately, I mean, Scott Adams did end up embracing Christ in his last week alive. But unfortunately, and what kind of put a damper on it, was that leading up to it, it was pretty explicitly the product of a kind of Pascal's wager of logic. I'm not really a believer, but I need to hang on to something in my dying days, so it might as well be God. And that's not the right attitude to approach religion. But isn't aren't all conversions kind of like that? I want to challenge people that say, like, well, because it's a Pascal wager, because Scott Adams is grabbing onto Christianity just because he's run out of options. Aren't all humans like that? Don't all humans kind of wait till the last possible moment when there's no possibility to do anything else? And then they latch on to Pascal's wager as the last possible thing they could do. I mean, there are more than a few saints in the Bible that were kind of a little bit like that. Or not saints in the Bible. I guess saints in the Acts of the Apostles. But I mean, there have been many hagiographies of saints that have told stories just like that. And I have to believe that even in a sense of religious transformation, you can fake it until you make it. It is possible to kind of just pursue truth and take your chances with faith, and eventually that will turn into something that is real. And this is the same thing for the development of Mencius Moldbug's Hard Party, his concerted political action, the kind of cult of commitment that we see nowhere in the modern world that somehow has to be forged out of an alliance of different people whose only commonality is that they're not progressives. What we're praying for, what we're hoping for, when we hope for a new regime can only be brought about by human control of the government. That can only be brought about by complete regime change. Complete regime change can only be brought about by the hard party, by a real party. A real party can only be brought about by concerted action. Concerted and consistent action. Concerted and consistent action can only be brought about by total human commitment. Total human commitment can only be brought about by belief. Belief can only be inspired by God. God cannot be commanded. God cannot be commanded. As they said, only God can save us. And everything we do until then is kind of a LARP. It'll get a little bit of oxygen, but it will fall apart without that spiritual component, like chimp energy always does. Like not phony elitism, but elitism without belief always does. These are temporary solutions. But part of me has to believe that if you sincerely pursue truth, even cynically, even in an attempt to kind of fake it, it will eventually become real truth and real faith. Aaron McIntyre says that there's no unironic way to be a Satanist. I think that, I don't know if that's exactly true. I think that there's ways that you can perform that where you don't lose your soul, but it's very hard, right? Because as soon as you ironically pretend to be a Satanist, you start becoming one, right? Well, in that same sense, I do not believe that it's not very easy to have a cynical conversion to Jesus Christ. Pascal's wager almost always becomes true in the final moments. The truth seeker that seeks for God in his final moments, even if he hasn't engaged in Pascal's wager, eventually finds an authentic faith in the last moments, a final salvation. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but that's the hope that we're all hanging on to at this moment. Well, guys, that's the end of the lecture portion. I guess we'll go on to super chats. I don't know if that really had a constant theme to it, but it kind of came together a little bit. All right, let's go to entropy. Oh boy, my voice. It's been 3 weeks since I've had this flu, and it's still plaguing me. USA for $3 USA. Avatar: The Last Airbender surprisingly had more of a cultural impact than Avatar: Dances with Smurfs. Easy mistake. So on my list of anime to watch, thank you for the $3 donation, first of all. Of the anime that is on my list to watch, I have been trying to, so a lot of my quality time with my wife is like in the last hour of the day when I'm too tired to do anything productive. And so we've been kind of watching TV series, and I've been very tempted to look into 2 animes that I didn't see when they were out. The first one was Avatar: The Last Airbender, and the second one is, Firian or whatever. And I am trying to talk her up to that. I'm not so sure that she'll relent. I've heard really good things about Avatar, and it's an American cartoon series. So maybe that would be good. I don't know. I mean, she really liked Adventure Time, and that's a cartoon. So I don't know. I mean, that might be it is culturally significant. One thing I will say though, I've always kind of mistrusted a little bit intellectual properties that have an Asian theme to them, that come from a Western, European, Caucasian culture. I feel like somehow we miss a qualitative aspect about Oriental cultures. And there's always kind of I always feel kind of like we're skinwalking. Like whenever I see something like Avatar, I can't speak for Avatar: The Last Airbender, but whenever I see something like Samurai Jack, or let's do a really deep nerd cut here, Legend of the Five Rings, or any of these fantasy series where it's Gaijin making a series that's set in Japan, it always feels like Caucasians walking around pretending to be Asian people. With Japanese people, it's a little bit different because Japanese people kind of act like white Asian people to begin with. But there's always this big disconnect where white people's perception of Asia and how Asian people actually think is a little bit different. And as the series goes on, it's always super easy to notice. But it's worth a shot. I definitely think that would be a fun thing to do. Haunting Beauty for $15 USA says Revenge of the Sith played a huge part in my early development and interest in storytelling. What really gripped me was how it executed the spiritual themes, especially how the ending unraveled. Well, yeah, Haunting Beauty, I kind of agree with you. Like I said that the Return of the Sith, the prequel series had its moments, and one of the moments that it did have was the scene in the opera with, I mean, it's been memed to death at this stage, between Palpatine and Anakin Skywalker. Uh, I wish they had done more of that and less of like Mace Windu fighting people with purple lightsabers and battle droids that, like the Darth Sidious was an amazing character design, but he really should have been something that was in the second episode, not the third one. He really distracted from the central drama that should have been Anakin Skywalker and Palpatine. Having all these droids and Wookiees, it was just, I felt like they really wanted to focus it down. And people are like, oh, that's what Plinkett said. All millennials have the same opinions about the prequel, and they're all from Red Letter Media. Yeah, but Red Letter Media is right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that they become cliche. They're still right. The truth can't become cliche. It's true. I mean, if you want to have a movie that focuses on those spiritual themes, and those spiritual themes need a little bit more space to breathe. And I felt like Lucas did have a bunch of scenes in Return of the Sith that were evocative spiritually, but they weren't given the same amount of space to breathe the way that similar scenes got space to breathe in The Empire Strikes Back. So I don't know. It is that is a problem. But I see what you're saying. I'll say that, right? I'm not going to say that the younger millennials, you guys do have a point. Isaac Young for $10 USA. I had plans for a Weird West novel where it would explore the brutal nature of conflict like in Blood Meridian. Native Americans summoning Wendigos, while a secretive angelic man in black roam the battlefield. Sadly, not enough time or money. Yes, I always believed that the Weird West setting was underexplored. This is like steampunk was done in by shitlibs, obviously. Like it was strangled in its crib. First of all, steampunk is not punk, which is a problem with the genre to begin with. But the problem is that steampunk was integrated into the progressive cultural sphere before it had any serious artist try to deal with its implications. The only person who's ever tried to deal with the implications of steampunk has, ironically enough, been two figures, and they're both Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash and Gibson's The Difference Engine. Both of those deal with the deeper, darker themes implicit in steampunk, and they're both kind of more cyberpunk than they're steampunk anyway. But the problem is that the genre of steampunk got absorbed, and now it's become kind of like a shitlib cliche. There are two genres out there for aspiring novelists that I would really like to see explored that are, I think, fertile ground for exploration, and they've really only ever been explored in games. The first thing that I would like to see explored is, like you said, the Weird West archetype. I think that this is just a criminally underutilized genre. The Western has always been the archetype of all American imagination. It has been, when you look at David Lynch, you're looking at a Western. The Coen brothers, all of their movies are Westerns. Cormac McCarthy, even his contemporary novels, are Westerns. Quentin Tarantino are Westerns. I mean, this is like the idea that you couldn't mix Westerns with Dying World or with post-apocalyptics. I mean, speak of the devil, Fallout is a Western. And even worse, Fallout is a Western that is currently falling victim to its own shitlib tendencies. They're essentially ruining it. But the dark gothic Western, or mixed with science fiction, mixed with post-apocalyptic elements, just a fertile ground The other one, for a more European dimension to this, would be the weird war genre. I think of that game, Forgotten Psalm, much less so Trench Crusade. Trench Crusade ruined it. Absolutely trash lore. I hated the aesthetics. But Weird War is just like World War One never ends. And then like a portal opens and all the world is kind of consumed in this war and no one knows who's fighting or who's what and everything's shrouded in mist and some change of epoch is occurring but no one can really put their finger on what is going on. That is supremely evocative and it's such an opportunity to explore something that's kind of been underexplored in the world. So there you go. Thank you. Isaac Young, $3. We need to talk about Avatar. The third movie is such a beautiful disaster. You see all the narratives break down. Yeah, but watching the third movie would involve me having to watch frickin' I don't know, man. Can I do it? People were like last year, people were coming to me and saying, dude, Dave, you have to see Terrifier. You have to see Terrifier. This is such a movie that's happening. And I saw Terrifier and it was just like a standard slasher movie. There was nothing special about it. It was just, there's nothing there. And so I don't know, a lot of these movies that people tell me I have to see, there ends up being like a little thing that's interesting about them. And then a lot of stuff that's just forgettable. Another one was like the Nosferatu movie, which was like great cinematography, great costumes. It didn't have a point. There's nothing to take from that movie. Maybe it's like, the only thing you could take from that movie is uncontrolled female sexuality destroys families and destroys civilizations and must be contained at all cost. maybe that's the moral of the story of Nosferatu. But the artist did not have enough. He didn't make the point sharp enough for it really to puncture our cultural moment. So that's always like a subtext and not an actual theme of the movie. What is the best emo band and why is it Linkin Park? I'm sorry, Melon. Like, what even is an emo band? Are all pop punk emo bands? Is Fall Out Boy an emo band? All I know about emo bands is that people used to complain about them. Like people used to complain about Linkin Park. Look, I'll praise Linkin Park in that of all the bands that I hated in the late 90s and the early 2000s, I was getting into all of these bands like the Smashing Pumpkins and Pearl Jam that were kind of fading from the scene. And so I was really kind of like, I was having none of this Limp Bizkit, rap rock stuff, Linkin Park. But I'll say of all those bands, Linkin Park was the best. Although there was a case for Evanescence, but Evanescence always felt like, what if Linkin Park had a female singer and it's the exact same style? Yeah, I guess I would comment on emo music, but I have no ability to it. For me, it only ever existed as an insult. Okay, thank you very much, Melon. Generico for $15 USA. I don't know if you said it, but your deep dive into popular culture, cinema, and music really reminds me of Jean Baudrillard and his hyper-reality observations. We are all living in the hyper-real now. Yeah, that's true. The idea or the hope is at some point we find ourselves out of the hyper real and we end up in the real world again. That is something that is, I don't think hyper reality can devour reality altogether. And look, if hyper reality was able to devour reality altogether, then it would feel really, really, really good to be us right now. We would kind of be enthralled by our own entertainment products. But in fact, the exact opposite is happening. We're getting bored of our own entertainment products because hyper reality cannot substitute for reality across all elements. Without that edge that reality has, human beings become dejected and bored and desiring something that is more permanent. And I think that is sort of our way out of this conundrum that we're facing. Um, Thank you very much, Generico. Nerve AMV Maker for $5. I never thought Avatar looked good. Compared to the urban alleys of film noir, Dickensian London streets, or even the dying worlds of Dark Souls, the environment lacks any evocative or symbolic power. The atmosphere of the world was non-existent. Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Like all of the animals in Avatar feel like they're made out of rubber. Like the ecology doesn't feel real. It feels like, what if we made like vacation brochures come alive? It looks like boomer clickbait. It looks like boomer clickbait. Avatar looks like all of the things that AI generates to be boomer clickbait on Facebook. But thank you very much. Yeah, it's a totally plastic reality, completely uninspiring. It just shows you too how the anime that these things are based on is to this day more inspiring in its look. A lot of that old anime does not hold up very well, but the two-dimensional style really does hold the aesthetic quality. And even though we know a lot of the ideas that were explored are kind of false modern notions, or they're in themselves simulacra of real ideas that are not kind of being taken to their ultimate conclusion. Um, the 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 aesthetics carry over and are perfect. I think of my ultimate go-to anime for this is Last Exile. Absolutely has no point, goes nowhere, stupid adventure story. But man, the aesthetics of it look amazing. The characters look amazing. It feels kind of cathartic being in that world. Just altogether interesting. Generico for $25 USA. Good job in bringing hyper reality conversation full world with Aaron McIntyre and Academic Agent. We can't have this magical thinking where we believe that believing hard enough makes changes we want to see. If we want to affect change, we need to first abandon the falsehoods of the political hyper reality and ground ourselves in the real. Yeah, I guess I did kind of, though I kind of did go back on that, right? Because although like just shouting at a political organization that does not exist is stupid, or going up to normies and demanding that they act like elites is stupid, or pretending that chimp energy is going to magically transform into a regime change is also stupid. I mean, like, look, a regime change will use chimp energy, but I don't think that JD Vance and Trump are going to execute a regime change. So since they're not, all of that usage of chimp energy is kind of going to be ultimately dissipated until the elite problem gets taken care of. But at the same time, even I am harboring a little bit of a hope of a magical transformation that will occur insofar as that I sincerely believe that if you get people to work together and pray together and look to the holy, that in that process, a belief will come about. There will be a reculturization and a reenchantment in that smaller place. I mean, I guess maybe you could say that is my own version of magical thinking. Like, Aaron McIntyre, I know he doesn't believe this, but it sometimes seems like he thinks that he can magic a regime change from chimp energy. Academic Agent seems to believe that he can magic an elite class from name changes and counter signaling and disapprobation. And I guess I believe magically that you might be able to magically generate a revival through intentional community, which is look, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it is a little bit of a long shot on my part. Chancey for $15 USA. What could Hollywood produce that could compete with the drama unfolding in our stage managed world? Yeah, and that's another thing too. I mean, in order for Hollywood to be relevant, I mean, the problem with Hollywood is not only can it not be more interesting than the news, it can't even seem to touch the news. It can't even seem to say like, "Oh, look at this thing that's happening in your world. Let me make a story about that." Like, let me have a hero that interacts in your world. No Hollywood production can talk about replacement level migration. No Hollywood production can talk about the degeneracy of communities anymore. They can talk about certain elements of our economic problems because the left shares in that observation, but they can't talk about the cultural or spiritual roots of those problems. They can't talk about the demographic roots of those problems, and they can't get people what they really want. What people want is an understanding that life will continue on in their line. Just think about this, like Godzilla minus one. It was practically a religious experience at the end of that movie. Spoiler alert, to see that there was a formation of what resembled a nuclear family. It was like a religious revelation. It was just them giving us that little. I mean, when was the last time the conclusion of a Hollywood movie was the creation of a happy heterosexual family? I haven't seen it recently, certainly, and I mean convincingly. I mean convincingly, not like the girl boss gets the guy. I mean in a traditional mode, in a way that looks like it would possibly have the chance to carry forward as a permanent thing once the curtain fell. I don't know. You don't see that very many. You don't see that very much anymore. I'll say that. Donald Michaels for $3 USA. Rip Scott Adams. Dilbert never meant anything to me. Not like Calvin and Hobbes. But it was clear that he meant something to older, bookish types in my life. His plactory deathbed conversion made me sad. Play Plactory? I don't even know that word. Why you may have taught me a new word. Placatory? Deathbed. I don't know. Placatory. I guess it's a word. Um, yeah, I mean, look, Dilbert is one of those things. It's not the same comic as it was in there were three different stages of Dilbert. There was Dilbert, the joke about the nerd joke thing with a lot of boomer humor in it, where Scott Adams was kind of cutting his teeth on humor. A lot of still good material from that era. There was sort of the corporate era of Dilbert where he was uh, um, kind of like lampooning late 90s, early 2000s corporate culture. And then there was the sort of last era of Dilbert where Dilbert was really more like a Doonesbury political cartoon for Scott Adams. And there are good things in all of those eras. I recommend checking out one of the greatest hits of Dilbert. I'd say Calvin and Hobbes still has a more sentimental place in my imagination. The problem with Calvin and Hobbes is that Calvin and Hobbes very obviously takes place in the 50s or 60s. And even in the 90s, it looked a little bit out of time and place. It was, it's like Peanuts, obviously. Like Peanuts obviously takes place in the 1920s and the 1930s. The most thing, I mean, it ran in the 50s and 60s. That's when it ran until the 90s, Peanuts. But the most notable thing about the kids in Peanuts is what? They don't have television. Everything in Peanuts implicitly revolves around the fact that none of the kids in that show have television. I think television was introduced later, but just to make the thing look more realistic. I think they had the kids watching TV in some off scenes, but those were always the least peanutty scenes of Peanuts. Charlie Brown and Lucy and Sally, they live in a world where kids are just wandering around the neighborhood and they don't have anything to do because there is no television. They're just bored out of their gourds. Anyway, yeah, thank you very much, Donald Michaels. Generico for $25. A message to young right-wing men. Learn to dance, classical or Latin partner dancing, and dancing are the physical lessons about masculine and feminine forms and the way they express, interplay with each other. It teaches how to be masculine and create a space where women want to come and be fully feminine. Now look, Generico. I'm going to partially endorse that advice with a huge caveat. Um, let's see this. Dancing. It's harder to learn than you might think. You can learn the basic, but you're not going to impress anybody with the basic. You're not going to impress anybody doing basic or variations on that in an actual classical dance competition or Latin partner dancing. And furthermore, it is a really bad place to meet women. Um, Women can implicitly tell when you're there to meet people, and they don't like it. It's forced. And so never go to a dance class to learn dancing to meet women. It's a horrible place to do that. Women have their guards up. And I think probably fewer and fewer women even do partner dancing anymore. I think that's kind of like probably a waning thing among the Zoomettes, although I might be wrong. Maybe post COVID, they've all caught the dancing itch once more, and they can't wait to go out there and do the waltz or the Salamanca or the polka or whatever, or East Coast swing. To maybe the '90s is back again, right? um, Dancing is a great skill to have in your tool belt, but it is also a very expensive skill to maintain. You need to practice to get good at dancing. And I took a few lessons. I never had very much practice with it. Enough to dance pretty well at my wedding, enough to impress my wife on our first date. But it wasn't something that I really maintained. The only alternative is if you really, really, really wanted to get competitively good at a certain single dance, like Latin dancing or salsa or whatever, if you got really, 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 really into that to the point where you were like a master, then that could become something that you could use socially to great effect, even possibly at that level to meet women. But mid-level introduction, good thing to have in your back pocket. I found it in my own experience hard to justify really keeping that skill up and developing it. But your mileage might vary, so consider it. Ben White for $3 USA. Hi, Dave. What would you say to your libertarian friends who still say that the right shouldn't acquire and use power because the left will use it against the right after they get back into power? Yeah, just like step over this conversation. This is stupid. I do not need to comment on the shooting of Renee Good. If it's a good shoot or a bad shoot, the only question is, does law enforcement have the right to enforce the law? Look, it's very sad. It's very sad. It's very sad. But look, all I can say is libertarians are not, there's no serious argument here. Look, this is how I would frame it. The problem is not the argument. The problem is the frame. The frame of the argument that the libertarians are trying to argue is, what if the world were ideal? Wouldn't taking power be bad in that world? Okay, great, but that's not the world we live in. Ideally, you're right, libertarians, get your gold star. But I live in the real world where someone's going to take power. And I'd rather it be somebody who's aligned to our interests, and libertarians are incapable of taking power. So I'm doing politics in the real world. And if you adjust your perspective to be more realistic, maybe you can ride along with me. But until then, the only thing this conversation is doing is advertising the fact that you care more about an ideal world than you care about the real world that we actually occupy. And if that's what you want to advertise, great, perfect. You have a gold star about how you behave in an ideal world. I don't believe I live in that world. That is the only reframing that I think is really necessary. Generico again for $10. Do you think part of the unity of the left and the division on the right is because the left has a shared hyperreality and the right, to the degree they reject the leftist hyperreality, can't agree on what constitutes the real, so we fracture? Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, that's exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I said. I mean, we use different words for this, right? I mean, hyperreality is a confusing way to put it. The left is a unified magisterial worldview. The right is not. The right is simply the rejection of the magisterial worldview. Now, to an extent, most people on the right, but by no means all of them, share in the previous Christian magisterial worldview. But not all right-wingers share in that perspective. There's a lot of atheists, there's a lot of Nietzscheans, there's a lot of pagans. So, until that point, I just find the word hyperreality really confusing. If you want to say that like all belief systems or magisterial belief systems are hyper realities, then you're right. The left has a shared hyper reality. The right only has a shared reality. That's kind of snappy. Maybe you could say that. The left has a shared hyper reality. The right only has a shared reality. I think that kind of begs the question, because that makes it sound like the right should be stronger, because the right is unified by a reality where the left is unified by this thing that is not so real, hyper reality. But in actuality, having a shared hyper reality, aka having a shared belief system, aka having a shared religion, makes your coalition stronger, and being unified by reality, aka being unified only by your grievances, makes you weak, because those grievances can be manipulated and modulated so that your coalition breaks apart. Whereas the unity of the hyper reality is eternal. Well, not eternal, but it's imperturbable to the ordinary goings-ons every day. People will be Christian regardless of whether they're rich or poor. This is always the problem of Marxism, right? This is always the problem of Marxism. There can be no class consciousness for ruling, because as soon as you win even one revolution, you will have power, and then you will have a ruling class, and there goes your class unity. So that's why the left had to find things like deeper resentments, like bio-Leninism, which leads you to that famous quote by Mystery Grove. Communism is when, what was it? Ugly, stupid people, the ugly, deformed people make being normal illegal. The rest is just ideological dressing that means nothing. Thank you very much, Generico. Ben White for $5. You made an interesting point about how there will always be women who are prone to correct you for your mistakes. Might as well have them do it for a pro-social way in service of God rather than to the progressive orthodoxy. I mean, yeah, ideally, like when we win, women will just come over automatically. It won't even be a contest. I mean, that's not to say that like there won't be women who are very, very effective at their jobs. I mean, even if we have if we had even the beginnings of a religious perspective, you would have a lot more roles for women to play. Outside of that, the only roles there are to play are hard political ones, which women are very, very unreliable political actors when they're in those roles. But yeah, eventually women will come along. That's just the destiny of how the species operates. And without modifying the biology of the human race, I don't think it can really be any other way. I mean, maybe that's what the end game is for progressivism. Maybe the end game for progressivism is just to literally bioengineer a new species to replace humanity. But I think that is still a long shot. Ben White for $3 USA. I would add that the needs to be tempered with the need for those women to submit to proper authority. Growing up in the South, I saw many times wives implicitly undermining their husband's authority. Yeah, there has to be an understanding that women can nag their husbands for putting their elbows on the table, but can't nag their husbands out of doing the right thing politically. I don't know how we do that. And there has to be separate male and female spaces. Otherwise, the power to enforce temperance, like you're saying, the power that women are naturally granted to enforce moral temperance, it will naturally therefore carry over to wielding hard political ideology and wielding political sovereignty, which female attitudes are notoriously bad at doing, because they never take ownership over their own ideas. So yeah, you were right about that. Leo Jean Guinad for $3 USA. I recommend you do a gaming stream of The Coffin of Andy and Laylee. Your friend Fritz Imperial highly recommends it. It's one of the best stories made in indie gaming recently. The problem is I would need to have time to do that. I'm currently running 2 podcasts and I have a full-time job that takes 50 hours a week of my time, and I have a family that I need to spend time with. My wife has a channel, a gaming channel that we've not updated at all, where we sometimes play games together. It's almost always something like Magic the Gathering. Maybe we could play that game together if it's a really good one, but you'd have to sell her on it and not me. And then we'd also have to find some way of making time for this podcast. We haven't really done that podcast since we lived on the East Coast. And since then, we've not had as much time as we'd ideally like to have. Contemporal for $20. Well, thank you very much for that very generous super chat. I have read 2.5 of Scott Adams' books. I feel and cry at your authentic soul that yearns for meaning and expresses itself through aestheticization of your passion for folk music. But I don't buy reaction, NRX entropy theory, or gratitude to God for creating us. Hedonism, nihilism, and Gnosticism feel more right. We are enslaved. Well, dude, hedonism, nihilism, and Gnosticism are all different things. Hedonism says that pleasure is the true meaning of life. Nihilism says that there's no meaning in life. And Gnosticism is kind of the inverse of all of those things, that says that the modern world, or the world that we experience in reality, is a fake one, and that the real one is purely spiritual, purely communicated in knowledge. I don't know. Those three ideologies are they are, I don't know if there's such thing as an opposite ideology, but they are in stark contrast to each other. They can't all three be true. NRX and entropy theory is a school of political realism that has nothing to do with the belief in a higher power. It is simply the observation about how politics works on a long enough time frame. So I don't know, man. I mean, I think that obviously you're tugging. If you are attracted to Gnosticism, you are attracted to the idea of, expressed in Platonism, I think better than in Gnosticism, that there is some otherworldly ideal that we are being called to beyond this physical reality, which would in many ways contradict hedonism. So I would say that you're tugging on a thread that points directly to religion. The only appeal I make to, Italian elite theory or the entropic view of history, that the only appeal I make to that is just purely like facts that you can see in historical records and in how our society operates. Take it or leave it, but it has nothing to do with the religious impulse. But I mean, if you're toying with Gnosticism, you have the beginnings of orthodoxy in you. So I would say maybe pursue that more. Ben White for $5 USA. Do these lefty white women protesting in Minnesota not realize that the demographic groups they are protesting on behalf of do not care nearly as much for those liberal white women? The average Somalian won't even spare those white women a second thought. No, they do not realize that. That it never enters into their mind. You are anthropomorphizing women. You are anthropomorphizing women in the sense that you are turning them into anthro men. You are de-gynepomorphizing them. You are thinking of women thinking like men rather than women thinking like women. When women see a protest, when men see a protest, they go, are those guys on our side? Is their cause just in the system of laws that we have today? Those are kind of the two thoughts that go through your head. For women, it's really more about status and optics. Like, is this cause the right cause? Like, is this what we're all feeling? Is this kind of in line with the spirit everyone else has about this? Does this make my care sensation tingle? That's really what draws most of these women into these protests. They feel an absence in their life for meaning. They want to do the right thing. And so they sort of defer to the group chat. And the group chat tells them this is a just cause, and they don't critically examine that. They don't ask questions like, are these people we're helping going to be nice to us? They assume that anybody who is good is going to be nice to them. They don't try to validate that. If somebody tells you that these people are victims, naturally they'll be nice to you. Lee Grongard for $3 USA. I feel like the left is running out of gas. I don't know if the right will win affirmatively, but a new order is in its birth pangs. Warhammer 40K is real, and we're all just choosing sides. Yeah, Sargon, that was originally, I believe, a Kevin Dolan quote, but Sargon of Carl Benjamin did an extended meditation on that based on Morgoth's article that was published, I believe, in the Islander magazine this last month. So the video was very good, although I have not ordered my copy of Islander yet. I will probably order it in the future. I am trying to manage my budget. I'll say that. But I'll try to order that. Absolute Defender for $10 USA. I am almost certain that you won't like Furion as much as everyone thinks you will. This is coming from someone who loves the show and loves anime in general. I suspect the show is far too cute for your tastes. Might I instead suggest Legend of Galactic Heroes? It was Mike Enoch's favorite. Oh yeah, maybe. I guess what I'm looking for is a certain amount of intelligence and bittersweet fantasy, I guess. Maybe it will be too kawaii. I don't like kawaii anime. Anytime anime tries to be too cute, it gets on my nerves a lot because I don't trust it. And nobody should trust cute. If we've learned nothing from 20 years of war against feminism, it should be that never trust kawaii. Cute things are not reliable. Not to say there can't be any cuteness inside things that are political otherwise, but it's just very hard to trust those things. Okay, one last one before the psalm. For Blank for $3. He says, I know you'll hate this question, but in your words, I want you to sell me on Catholicism. I'm Protestant, but your arguments Catholicism might change my mind. I believe we are both going to heaven. Okay, so here's my pitch for Catholicism standing on one leg. Protestantism relies on three propositions. Grace alone, faith alone, and scripture alone. Grace alone, like we are saved by God's grace alone, is not contested between Catholicism and Protestantism. Almost everyone in the contemporary world thinks that the faith and acts distinction is sort of meaningless. Inside the world of medieval thought, people were much more hung up on languages. And so when people said, is it faith alone or faith and acts, that the idea that it couldn't kind of be both, like the chicken and the egg problem was like, that was a hard conundrum for medieval people, right? Every chicken comes from an egg, every egg comes from a chicken, right? So it is correct to say that every good act comes from a sense of faith, but then you could also say that faith without acts is meaningless. So it is very obvious to most contemporary Christian thought that faith and acts are interdependent cores. They cannot be separated from each other. So the idea that faith first is a tenet is kind of meaningless. I think this was a meaningless fracture inside the medieval world, and I think it's an artifact. And I think that no serious Christians really treat this as a serious contention. The third thing is scripture alone. Okay, so here's where I'm getting into the real case for Catholicism. Jesus did not leave his disciples a scripture. He left them a church. Into the church's possession, the Gospels and the letters of, St. Paul the Apostle and the Revelations and the scriptures were placed. But the church was created by Christ when he was physically present on earth, and they were given the scriptures. Okay, great. But, maybe I haven't dissuaded you from Protestantism, because if you're Anglican or anything else like that, you do believe just what I said, that in the church was both the steward of the scriptures, and the scriptures cannot really be used without a church body to inform believers on the interpretation of that language. Uh, Language does not have absolute meaning. There needs to be an interpretive body in charge of that language that is guided by some Holy Spirit. Now, the Protestant answer to that objection is that the church is all believers, and all believers are to be guided by the Holy Spirit when they read scriptures. That is kind of manifestly false. I'm not going to say that there is sort of a witness in Protestantism in one way. I'm going to give Protestantism its due in this regard. Ordinarily, I would assume that if everyone read the Bible and came up with their own interpretation, then you'd end up with all sorts of crazy stuff. There would be things like, Santeria and Vadun and Mormonism, like crazy reinterpretations on Jehovah's Witnesses, like all these unorthodox views of Christianity just flying around. Like the majority of Protestantism would just be like crackpot versions of Christianity. And for the most part, that didn't happen. For the most part, all Christians ended up with, reading their own Bibles independently of the church, came up with Christianities that were kind of sort of close to Catholicism. And I do believe that that is evidence of the Holy Spirit operating through believers. That being said, if it worked, there would only be one Protestant sect, pretty much. It doesn't work that way. It leads to schism, and that's a problem because, point 4, Christians should be under one church. There is one historical witness. There is one mission for Christians. There is one church that unifies all believers. And if you, that church needs to have political representation, which necessarily has to be through some magisterial body, as in the Holy See. And 2, collecting my thoughts here, it is clear, at least from the historical records that we have, that the Church of Rome, aka the Roman Catholic Church, aka the Holy See in the Vatican, is the direct descendant of the Apostle Peter, who was personally put in charge of Christ's church while our Savior was physically present on this earth. I think that those 4 points point to Catholicism more than Protestantism. Do with them what you will. Okay. On that lengthy explanation, I will read one more super chat. There's one more that came in. Limbob Langford for $10 says, perspicuity of scripture is what convinced me Protestantism was false. They don't have reliable ways to resolve disputes. Yeah, look, you have to give the Protestants credit, right? There is Mormonism, there is Santeria, there is like Vadun, but all of these hard heresies, they didn't come out of Protestant people reading their Bible in good faith. They came out of like either crazy prophets. I'm sorry, Mormons in the audience. I don't think Joseph Smith was a prophet. They either come from like weird extra prophets that obviously were not working off scripture and didn't claim to be, or they're literally syncretic elements that are absorbed from other religions, like Vadun and Santeria. So Protestantism actually, like, you're right. If Protestantism was right, it would be a lot more unified. But part of me also kind of admires Protestantism for not being as fucked up as it probably should be. And so I have to imagine that the Holy Spirit is operating at least a little bit in that heresy. Otherwise, it would just gone the way of the Cathars and gone completely nuts. If you're not sacrificing goats after or hopping on funeral pyres after 200 or 300 years of separation from the Holy Spirit, I think that the Holy Spirit must be kind of guiding you a little bit. That might be heresy on my part, but we'll see. $3 from blank again. I really appreciate your answer and measured response. I'd love to see you talk to Redeem Zoomer sometime. Last week I mentioned I proposed. She did say yes. Oh, congratulations. There's no name here. So I assume you're the same person who proposed to his girlfriend last week. But thank you very much. Dirk Voyager for $10. Thank you very much. Great to see you here. And thank you for saving my voice. Very generous. And Kit Temporal for another $10. The character limit stifles what I was trying to say. Nihilism is there is no objective meaning. Hedonism is philosophically is the fulfillment of desire is what is moral to me, or desirism. Those can coexist. When I say Gnosticism, I mean the actions of God in the Bible are evil and oppressive, real or not. Okay, but you contradicted yourself, right? Because for God's actions in the Bible to be evil, there has to be an evil that stands above God. This is what led the Gnostics to believe that the God of the Old Testament, or the God in charge of the material world, was a demiurgical entity, meaning that there was a greater God above him that was, in some people's estimation, or at least the Gnostic Christians who synchronized Gnosticism with Christianity, was embodied in Christ. So it was a little bit of Marcionism in there too, right? Look, you can be a nihilistic hedonist. I think that is a self-terminating proposition. I think if you look at the lives of nihilistic hedonists, they're not even doing their nihilism consistently, and they're not practicing their hedonism effectively. So I would argue that those are self-defeating propositions. But if you look carefully in your own assertions about the evil of God, you will see that it points to the necessary existence of a higher Platonic form of good, which implies a higher form of God beyond that. So thank you very much, and I think I'm finally at the end of my super chats right now. All right, Psalm 14, King James Version, because why do anything else? Psalm 14, the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, they have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. The Lord looketh down from heaven upon the children of men, to see if there are any that did understand and seek God. They are all gone aside, they are all together become filthy. There is none that doeth good, not one. Have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge, who eat up my peoples as they eat bread, and call not upon the Lord? There were they in great fear, for God is in the generation of the righteous. Ye have shamed the counsel of the poor, because the Lord is his refuge. O that salvation of Israel were to come out of Zion, when the Lord bringeth back the captivity of his people. Jacob shall rejoice, and Israel shall be glad. Thank you very much for joining me for this unexpected Fiddler's Green podcast number 69, A Winter of American Content. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the evening and a blessed week. I will see you next